1 second, I'm getting an error. I think the custom streaming service is about to start.
At this time, would sergeants please start your recordings? PC recording good?
All recording good.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's remote New York City Council fiscal 2023 preliminary budget oversight hearing of the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. At this time, would all panelists please turn on your videos. To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices to vibrate or silent. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Good afternoon and welcome to the hearing for the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. I am Councilmember Chi Osei, chair of this committee, and today we will begin with a hearing on the city's 3 library systems, followed by a hearing on cultural affairs. The committee will also be hearing 2 pieces of legislation today. First, a pre-considered resolution sponsored by Councilmember Hudson in relation to condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine and calling upon Congress and President Joseph R. Biden to increase and expand the severity of sanctions imposed on Russia. And second, a reconsidered resolution sponsored by Councilmember Vernikov in relation to expressing support for Ukraine. And finally, the committee will hear public testimony related to these 2 hearings, as well as the legislation. I do want to acknowledge Councilmember Vernikov and give her the floor to speak on her resolution.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Osei, and thank you, council members and others on this call. Everyone knows the horrific situation going on in Ukraine, and New York City really has the largest population of Ukrainians living here in the country. And I'm in touch with people on the ground right now. We're really working very hard to make sure that the refugees and others get the aid that they need. It's been really, really difficult. And I want to thank all of you for the incredible support, to the bipartisan support I've received in the council for this issue. New York City is really the center of the world, and it's extremely important that we show our support and we stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and also the Ukrainians living here in our city. And I want to really thank Councilmember Dinowitz, the chair of the Jewish caucus, and the caucus, as well as all the council members, and Councilmember Hudson for also putting out a strong resolution in support of Ukraine. And thank you all for the opportunity to speak on this.
Thank you. And with that, I would like to welcome you to our libraries hearing. This afternoon, we will be discussing the fiscal 2023 preliminary expense and capital budget for the systems. For fiscal 2023, the administration is proposing a $418.1 million subsidy for the systems. The fiscal 2023 preliminary capital commitment plan, which covers fiscal 2022 to 2026, includes $1 billion for the library systems. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak, the 3 library systems quickly pivoted their work to providing online and virtual services and programs when neighborhood branches were closed. The 3 systems also worked closely with the administration to offer vital services to city residents. Hence, I'm very disappointed to see reduction to operation subsidy to the systems. Reductions totaled $12.9 million in fiscal 2022. I want to ensure that the fiscal 2023 preliminary plan adequately funds the city's library systems as they recover from the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. To ensure that the city is well equipped to manage the recovery from this pandemic, the council calls on the administration to support the library systems by increasing their expense and capital budgets to meet all shortfalls the systems have. It is essential that the budget that we adopt this year is transparent, accountable, and reflective of the priorities and interests of the council and the people we represent. I look forward to an active engagement with the administration over the next few months to ensure that the fiscal 2023 adopted budget meets the goals the council has set out. I would also like to acknowledge and recognize members of this committee, including Councilmember Moya, Councilmember Dinowitz, Councilmember Lewis. I would also like to thank my staff for organizing today's hearing, including committee's counsel Brenda McKinney, legislative policy analyst Christy Dwyer, and principal financial analyst Aaliyah Ali, as well as my budget and legislative director May Vuchapong Vidana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My name is Brenda McKinney, and I am counsel to the New York City Council's Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. Before we begin today, I want to remind you that you will be on mute until you are recognized to speak, at which time you will be unmuted by the Zoom host. If you mute yourself after you have been unmuted, you will be unmuted again by the host. Please be aware that there could be a delay in muting and unmuting, so please be patient. During the hearing today, if council members would like to ask questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function and you will be called upon to speak. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, including responses. Excuse me. As noted by the chair today, we will begin with libraries, followed by cultural affairs. We do not need to administer the oath or the affirmation to the library witnesses, but we will ask that you testify in the following order. First, Mr. Tony Marks, President of the New York Public Library, followed by Ms. Linda Johnson, President and CEO of the Brooklyn Public Library, and finally, Mr. Nick Buren, Chief Librarian of the Queens Public Library. Thank you, and with that, Mr. Marks, you may begin when you are ready.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you to the staff, particularly thank you to Speaker Adams and to Chair Osei. It's, you can just feel the new energy of the council, of the team, of the administration, as everyone sort of rolls up their sleeves. As we emerge from 2 even more impossible years than we could have imagined. So it's an honor to be here and to be together and to be working all together. And, you have my testimony, written testimony, so I will not read it to you. I'll be very brief so that we can have as much conversation as you would like. I'll just start by saying what we already know. The public libraries are the most visited civic institution in this town. They are the most trusted. They have 2 particular elements that I think are particularly relevant or noteworthy these days, which is we are the institution that is focused on learning and opportunity for everyone, full stop, at a moment when those are crucial and crucially missing in too many people's lives. And we have a capacity to innovate and to address those needs, to focus in on digital, to focus in on the neighborhoods of needs, the focus people who need workforce development, all of it. That makes us a great partner, as we have always been, for the city council, for the administration, for the citizens of New York. Just to drill down in one particular programmatic area, we have continued to build up and continue to focus on our youth and education programs. We have seen the existing gaps of access to information, to quality instruction, to after school, all of that. And we've seen how those gaps have exploded during the pandemic, particularly in those neighborhoods most hard hit by the pandemic, who are already suffering from the economic inequality issues that we all live through. So we have doubled down on our after-school model, drop in. You know that you can come to our libraries and get help from tutors who are reliably there in whatever subject you're working on, so that you can help to fix the gaps that have been produced during these difficult 2 years. We're creating teen centers in our neighborhoods so that we can help students in the digital age prepare for that age, for work, finding work in those areas. We have a flagship of that at our new Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library, where we have a recording studio, and it's chock-a-block every day. And we want that to be in our system, throughout our system, especially in the poorest neighborhoods. We've launched a new center for educators to get the research material out into classrooms as teacher aids, as curriculum, workshops, also bringing students into our great new Treasures exhibit, which is an amazing introduction to every possible world through our collections. And we continue to innovate on policy, most notably eliminating late fines, which instantly unblocked over 113,000 just in our system cards that were blocked. New Yorkers who could not use our resources because we had told them that they didn't have enough money, in effect, to do so. And we are free, we are respectful, we are about access. We got rid of the fines. That's a statement, a clear statement of our values. I'll just turn very briefly to the capital agenda because we know how important it is to have facilities that are not just not leaking, but are respectful and inspiring in every neighborhood. It's why we renovated the Niarchos Foundation. It's why we're doing so much work in our neighborhoods. So for instance, whether it's the Woodstock branch or the Washington Heights branch, for instance, in 2014, when we did a renovation in Washington Heights, we saw a 47% increase in visits, a 45% increase in circulation, and 105% increase in exactly those education programs that the folks in that neighborhood I grew up in, need. And one of the powers of the library is we can't require you to come. There's no curriculum. We only offer what people need, and when we have facilities that enable us to do that, we can offer the programs, and New Yorkers come. We have identified just this year about $277 million in new system-wide capital needs. We're looking to get into the 10-year capital plan again. That is essential for us to be able to be efficient. We're looking at alternative models, including what we call the Inwood model, which is a new library needed in the neighborhood. Again, neighborhood in this case I grew up in, but with using the air above that we had never used before for 175 units of 100% affordable housing. We know that there continue to be options in public and private financing for our capital needs. We are talking to the administration about how to finally fix, if that's the right word, the DDC problem that we are all painfully aware of. We are grateful to the mayor for not including a cut to libraries. We take that as a sign early on of his and his administration's acknowledgement but we also ask that the city council restore and baseline last year's funds and meet our expense request, including the library materials that people rely on, the non-capital eligible infrastructure costs, and support, for instance, for the Treasures exhibit that we want every high school student, every middle school student in New York to visit. Let me just say in conclusion, again, this has been a whirlwind of 2 years. It's going to take everyone a little bit of time to just relax and get over the trauma as much as possible that everyone has suffered, particularly our frontline folks. But the library has been here. We have been and will remain open the whole time. We have retained and enhanced, built our commitment and our offerings to ensure equal access to books, to knowledge, to education for all, regardless of the crisis's twists and turns throughout. And we look forward to not only continuing to do that, but to build upon it, because that is what we need at this point. It's what New Yorkers need. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to serve with you here and to be here. And I'm happy to answer any questions, of course. I'm eager to hear from my colleagues.
Thank you, President Marks. And before I let Brenda continue, I do want to acknowledge my colleagues, Councilmember Brewer, Councilmember Farias, Councilmember Hudson, and Councilmember Ong. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chair. And next we will hear from President Johnson from the Brooklyn Public Library. We're unmuting you now and when you are ready, President Johnson.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and City Council. I'm Linda Johnson, President and CEO of Brooklyn Public Library. Thank you, Speaker Adams, Chair Osei and Brannon, and the committee members for the opportunity to testify on the preliminary budget, and to our Brooklyn delegation and the entire City Council for supporting New York City's libraries. Before I proceed with my testimony, I would just like to also thank Council people Vernikoff and Hudson for their work on the Ukraine crisis. I could go on at length about how the situation amplifies the fragility of democracy and the roles that libraries play in keeping citizens civically engaged, but I won't. On a small note, I just want to include an anecdote and tell you all that within 24 hours of the first strike, Brooklyn Public Library had published book lists to help our patrons, both the large Ukrainian population that lives in Brooklyn and New York City, Brooklynites in general, to help them understand the crisis and to get accurate and good information. We are here and tailoring our services to our patrons day in and day out, whether it's about health and COVID or about international crises. But today we're here to talk about money, which is of course key to our future and our operations. And we ask that you continue that support and restore the Council's $14 million Libraries Initiative, essential operational funding, which has not carried through in the fiscal year 2023 preliminary budget. We also ask the city for sorely needed capital allocation of $85 million. In the wake of the pandemic, libraries are poised to help rebuild a more equitable New York, but we need functional buildings and adequate staffing in order to remain open to the public 6 or even 7 days a week. With 217 branches across all 3 boroughs, including 61 in Brooklyn, libraries provide a safe, dignified, and absolutely free public space to every New Yorker in every neighborhood. Our librarians, technology resource specialists, and other staff members build long-standing relationships with the communities they serve, giving them the ability to assess the needs of those communities and to meet them. Whether with ESOL and high school equivalency classes, homework help, or story time in Spanish, Creole, Urdu, or 8 other languages. This is what makes the library the most deeply trusted, democratic, and far-reaching institution in our city. Prior to the pandemic, Brooklyn Public Library welcomed over 9 million visits in a single year, with more than 15 million books checked out and 1 million program attendees. In March 2020, forced to shut our doors for the first time in our 125-year history, We adapted many of those programs to digital platforms with great success, producing over 7,000 virtual programs in the first year for 1 million attendees, from personalized job assistance to grief support groups. We began reopening in the summer of 2020 with grab and go lobby service, and by the summer of 2021 had welcomed patrons back into all available branches to browse the collection and use computers, printers, and other critical technology. Brooklynites continue to return to their local libraries and venture in for the first time. So far in fiscal year 2023, more than 35,000 people have signed up for new library cards at their local library. We've seen over 600,000 Wi-Fi sessions, and physical checkouts are climbing toward pre-pandemic levels. As Omicron is receding, we have been able to resume indoor, in-person programming once again, including a concert last week with the Harlem Chamber Players that was at capacity. At the same time, the demand for virtual programs and services continues to be robust. Last week, more than 600 people tuned into a panel about the Lenape history via Zoom. We have seen more than 40,000 new e-card holders, and ebook checkouts have soared, with a record-breaking 350,000 checkouts in January alone. As ever, online or in person, libraries are centers of literacy. We equip New Yorkers with the reading skills they need to learn about the world, succeed in their lives, and participate fully in our society. We also believe everyone in our city should be digitally literate. In the world of libraries, we've long known how many New Yorkers live on the wrong side of the digital divide, 800,000 in Brooklyn alone. The pandemic farther widened that divide and made it visible to all. New Yorkers need broadband and digital skills in order to access city benefits, search and apply for jobs, connect with healthcare providers, complete homework, and much more. That's why when we were forced to close our doors, we installed antennas on the roofs of 50 branches to amplify Wi-Fi beyond our walls, and worked with the Department of Transportation to create outdoor library spaces. We published a guide to accessing the FCC's emergency broadband benefit, a monthly subsidy for home broadband, and trained librarians to help patrons complete the application, which is, ironically, online. We loaned hotspots to adult learning students, and our older adult literacy navigators helped our patrons interact via Zoom. We recently outfitted a new techmobile with Wi-Fi, laptops, and more to take tech workshops on the road to high schools and senior centers. In addition to being the largest provider of free Wi-Fi and tech access in New York, libraries are the largest hub for career services and aspiring entrepreneurs. We're the sole public hub for job seekers in 64% of the city's neighborhoods, and the only local public resources for small business owners in 67%, including many places where minority and immigrant owned businesses are still reeling from the pandemic. Our business and career services include personalized resume and career coaching, as well as financial literacy workshops. Our annual Power Up competition provides intensive mentorship classes and seed funding for aspiring entrepreneurs. This year, 70% of participants had never before owned a business. 68% were women and 56% were Black. All of them are now better equipped to achieve their goals and enrich their communities. Civic literacy is also of utmost importance to libraries. At the Civic Commons at Central Library, Brooklynites can apply for a passport or an ID NYC card. They can also meet with immigration attorneys for free, join study groups for the citizenship exam, or get help preparing their taxes. Health literacy is paramount to libraries too. We continue to partner with the city's Test and Trace Corps, distributing free at-home COVID test kits at 23 branches. We recently offered walk-in vaccines at 5 branches so children could get their shots in a familiar, friendly environment and even leave with a reward, their own copy of Where the Wild Things Are. Beyond COVID, we offer nutrition education, support navigating Medicare and other health coverage, meditation classes, and more. To ensure everyone in Brooklyn has access to these and other resources, we also deliver library services beyond our own walls. In lockdown, our older adult services team regularly called to check in on dozens of homebound patrons in our Books by Mail program. Throughout the crisis at Rikers, Brooklyn Public Library lent books to incarcerated parents virtually and via mail, and we're working to resume in-person service there. Each week, our redesigned bookmobiles visit shelters for families experiencing homelessness, and we hope to soon reconnect with schools and senior centers. At this moment, our city faces widespread learning loss, disproportionate unemployment among communities of color, and the effects of extreme social isolation and fragmentation. Thankfully, libraries have the experience and the expertise to address these challenges. With our partners in Queens and New York Public Library and within the Adams administration, we are working to design new programs and also adapt and scale the ones that have succeeded before. But again, we can only do this work with functional buildings and adequate staffing, which is why our fiscal year 2023 preliminary budget request prioritizes restoration of the council's library initiatives, $14 million across the 3 systems, including $3.9 million for Brooklyn. This funding allowed us to continue providing service throughout the pandemic, and without its restoration, we risk having to cut our already insufficient branch repair budget, cut our collections budget, and eliminate staff positions. Like other agencies, Brooklyn Public Library was asked to absorb a peg in the current fiscal year, which we can withstand if we forego hiring for existing vacancies. But operating without full staffing is challenging. With the Omicron surge, we endured numerous closures throughout the system and therefore had to reduce hours. Resuming in-person programs, in addition to Sunday service, is pushing us to the limit of our capacity to operate. Apart from staffing, the other cause of library closures is failing infrastructure, long outdated HVAC systems, leaking roofs, and broken boilers. In Brooklyn alone, we have over 1.1 million square feet of city-owned buildings to maintain with $250 million in deferred maintenance and no recurring unallocated capital funds to depend on. It means that year after year, we're forced to respond to emergencies rather than to perform preventative maintenance, to choose which projects to make piecemeal project while others stall, and all too often to dip into our operating budget. Ultimately, this problem, as my colleague, Dr. Marks said, needs long-term attention. And we will look for your assistance in advocating for libraries in next year's 10-year capital plan. For now, we ask that you do all you can to support increased capital funds for libraries in this year's budget. We have proven that with adequate funding, we are capable of creating inspiring public spaces. In October, we opened Adams Street Library, the first new Brooklyn Public Library branch in 4 decades, to serve the communities of Dumbo, Farragut, and Vinegar Hill. The building is a model for 21st century library design, and it shows. It's bustling with activity every day. This year, we look forward to opening new libraries in Crown Heights, Brooklyn Heights, and East Flatbush, not to mention the new Center for Brooklyn History, the largest archive of Brooklyn history in the world, now housed in the former Brooklyn Historical Society building on Pierpont Street. Every community deserves an inspiring library with services tailored to its needs. And there are profound needs across the city in this moment. In order for New York to recover from the pandemic, all the suffering it has wrought and the inequities it's laid bare, our city must invest in public space and public services for all New Yorkers. Located in every neighborhood and trusted by every generation, libraries are uniquely positioned to help New Yorkers build a more democratic, more cohesive city. I urge you, invest in your communities by investing in public libraries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now move to Mr. Buren, if you are ready for the Queens Public Library.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Nick Buren, Chief Librarian and Senior Vice President at the Queens Public Library. On behalf of the library and our President and CEO, Dennis Walcott, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Chair Osei, Speaker Adams, and the members of this esteemed committee for the opportunity to speak with you today about our budget priorities for next fiscal year. QPL is excited to begin its partnership with a new chair, new speaker, a new class of council members, and a new mayor. We are filled with tremendous optimism regarding the future of this great city and are eager to work together as we do our part to ensure a full recovery for New York City. The City Council provides significant support to New York City public libraries, and it would be impossible for us to meet the needs of our customers without it. Therefore, on behalf of every person who works and is served by Queens Public Library, thank you. March 16th will mark 2 years since the unprecedented closure of our physical locations to the public. QPL has been robustly re-emerging safely reintroducing in-person activities and playing an integral role in New York's recovery. We continue our virtual programming, which has been outstanding. We've conducted over 29,000 virtual and in-person programs, grab and go activities, and outreach activities from March 2020 through the end of January 2022. In that same period, we circulated almost 4 million ebooks and other e-materials and added over 123,000 items to our digital collection. Our live and archived programs, such as hip hop DJ sessions with Ralph McDaniels and our 24-hour Black Health and Healing Virtual Summit, were viewed nearly 1.1 million times. The library provides a vast array of services to the communities we serve, and I would like to highlight just a few things. We operate 7 adult learner centers with full-time professional staff and volunteers who tutor literacy groups and facilitate ESOL conversation groups. Our Job and Business Academy provides specialized training and learning opportunities with an emphasis on technology training to job seekers, aspiring entrepreneurs, and business owners. They also work very closely with our correctional outreach to provide those same services too. Our mail-a-book services offer homebound customers the convenience of having library materials and virtual programs delivered to their homes free of charge. Our Toddler Learner Centers is a special program where parents can learn about nutrition, speech development, early literacy, and parenting skills while toddlers become familiar with social environments at an early age. To prepare children to read, our Kickoff to Kindergarten develops knowledge of early literacy skills with guided activities and story time to families. The Children's Discovery Center, located at our central library, has hands-on exhibits and learning labs led by dedicated discovery teams. We developed our Stacks After School program, which is free enrichment programs for children's grades K to 5. And we operate 2 dedicated teen centers that serve as safe spaces for middle school and high school students to complete homework assignments, do research, participate in programs and leadership activities, and explore their creativity. And nearly 15,000 young people participated in over 2,200 summer reading program sessions this past summer. We have worked closely with the city in an effort to combat COVID-19 and to engage our communities during these challenging times. Whether it was providing host sites for test and trace, vaccination sites, DOE learning labs, polling locations, or conducting 2020 census outreach, Queens Public Library has been there to serving the people of the borough. 3 of our locations served as COVID-19 vaccination sites for children ages 5 to 11. 18 of our locations began distributing COVID-19 test kits to the public. And to date, we have distributed more than 23,000 coronavirus test kits to the public. Mayor Adams' fiscal year 23 preliminary budget instituted a 3% cut to our operating budget this fiscal year, but rescinded a proposed fiscal year 23 funding cut of 3%. Fortunately, we have found ways to absorb the reduction for this year without affecting hiring or service levels. However, if things change in the mayor's executive budget and cuts are reproposed for fiscal year 23, staffing levels, public service hours, and our collection will likely be impacted. With 66 locations in every neighborhood, Queens Public Library has a large capital program with a variety of needs. In our 10-year capital plan submitted to the city, we have identified a need of $270 million over the next 10 years. Of this, we need $98.6 million in fiscal year 23 to address projected funding deficits, as well as to begin the process of initiating Tier 1 priority capital projects in need of immediate attention. An additional amount of $13.3 million is needed to launch those same Tier 1 projects. When the library is forced to make emergency critical infrastructure repairs, operating funds must be used for capital repairs. Therefore, it is important that the City Council continue to advocate for New York's library systems to receive dedicated funding in the mayor's 10-year capital plan. Being able to have a dedicated capital budget will allow the library to effectively plan and maintain its capital portfolio. Equally important, we respectfully request that the City Council, at minimum, reauthorize its $14 million library initiative, which QPL received $3.9 million. This funding is vital as it allows us to address non-capitally eligible and critical maintenance projects, as well as support staffing levels, programs, and materials. Libraries have been the forefront of bridging the digital divide, and we've secured 2,200 hotspots to lend to our customers, but we know more is needed. We have communicated to the administration the need of $7.9 million in new operating funds in fiscal year 23 in order to meet this anticipated demand. As the center of community life, we build strong neighborhoods through the multitude of free programs and services we provide. For the library to meet the needs of our customers, especially the most vulnerable populations, we respectfully ask for your continued financial support and ask that you prioritize QPL and the New York City libraries in adopting the fiscal year 23 budget. Chair Osei and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We will now move to the chair for questions, but before we begin, just a quick reminder that we will do chair questions and then council member questions. So if any council members have questions, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. You will have 5 minutes and we will be calling on you in the order that you raise your hand in Zoom after the chair question portion. Thank you very much. And Chair, to you.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you to all of our esteemed testifiers this afternoon. Really do appreciate all of the work that you do and the passion that you have for that work. I also do want to acknowledge more of my colleagues that have entered this hearing, Councilmember Hanif, as well as Councilmember Joseph. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, I do have some questions in regards to the budget, obviously, and I'm looking forward to getting into them for myself as well as everyone that's on this call. And I do want to start by asking for fiscal year 2023. As you know, the administration is proposing a $418.1 million subsidy for the library systems, which is a decrease of $13.8 million from last fiscal year. More than half of the library systems budgets are city funding. New York Public Library's budget is approximately 59% funded with city funding. Queens Public Library budget is approximately 91% funding with city funding, and BPL, their budget is approximately 85% funding with city funding. How will the cuts impact the systems, and what measures will this cut require the systems to take?
Coming, 1 sec.
Do we want to start with you, President Marks?
What? 1 second. So
Okay.
we are, obviously what is at most predominantly at risk here is our library materials, which we would have to reduce. And, this is in neighborhoods, including neighborhoods where people don't even have books at home. It's reducing our facilities, maintenance and cleaning facilities, as well as, we are vulnerable in terms of the rent, for instance, for our Inwood temporary site.
I'll go next. I think all of us have budgets that are have similar components. We spend a lot of money on salaries and wages and material, and so cuts require us to be staffed too leanly. That's a word, and staffing levels translate specifically to hours that we're able to operate. So if we're in a situation where we cannot hire the staff that we need, we will not be able to consistently be in the neighborhoods where we need to be. And that is sort of the first tenet of librarianship. It's important to be consistent, and it's important to be there for the community when we say we will be there. We've worked hard to get to the point where we can say honestly that we are within a mile of every New York resident, and that we are opened in many places 7 days a week. And it would be devastating to have to cut back on that level of service. And then, of course, the other area of our expenditures that are in jeopardy would be maintaining the materials budget, keeping our collections current, having as robust a digital collection as we need these days, and continuing to maintain the hard copy material.
Thank you. And Mr. Byrne?
Thank you very much. I just want to echo what has been said, but I want to emphasize that our largest part of our budget is people, and people is what keeps our libraries open. And people is actually the connections that, our public has with the library. A library is not a library without the positive, interactive people that actually, that are actually in there to help make those connections. And so the largest, our most important resource is the people that work in them, and that would be the one that would suffer the most if we didn't have the funding that we needed. Thank you.
Thank you, you three. So another question that I do have is, during the pandemic, all three library systems received federal and state funding to help sustain the systems and their programming. What is the state and federal funding each system expects to receive this fiscal year, and how has the libraries used the federal and state funding?
I can start off. So yes, we did receive federal funding from IMLS. That was the CARES grant that we used, and that was really provided a number of things. So one of the things the CARES Act did for us is really help with the reentry program for incarcerated adults, so that we can equip them with smartphones, online resources, job training in a virtual environment, so that we didn't have to completely eliminate that really important program. The rescue package provided the hotspots lending, and we also received an NEH grant as part of the rescue package that really helped with fund podcasts for stopping Asian hate as well. So that's what we were able to do with the funding from last year.
I would just say that our state and federal funding is, just a small portion of our overall budget. And on the federal side, in particular, we do get some money for laptops and E-rate. But on the state side, we use the money that we get from the state for capital projects. It does not fit into our operating budget the way city money does.
I'm not being, oh, there we go, sorry. So similarly, for federal funding, we get about $1 million. Whoops,
I can hear you.
Sorry. We get about $1 million from federal funding, and similarly, IMLS, NEH grants, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. From the state, mostly by formula, we're getting close to $20 million, and plus 4.2 from state library construction aid. All these are essential, but they are complete. They are statistically very small compared to our reliance and our partnership, of course, with the city and with the city council.
Thank you, you three. And President Marks, we'll start with you on this one. How do you think the pandemic affected the different sources of funding?
Well, look, we continue to be grateful, of course, to the city council in particular that have been a crucial partner through ups and downs. The administration, I think, understands, appreciates the power of what we do. We've gotten one-time federal support, as everyone has, as part of the pandemic. We've also seen here at the New York Public where we are more reliant on private support, particularly to support the research libraries, the central administration. That has seen significant increases of public support, including, I think all systems do this in terms of, sort of broad New York City support. But the truth is, Mr. Chairman, we're also, in effect, trying to run a library. We have an existing budget that we've been able to steadily maintain and grow with the various challenges. But we're now, after the pandemic, we see we have to return to physical, especially in the poorest neighborhoods where people are, so needing for our services, our programs. But we're now running also a digital library, which the pandemic proved the import of, and we cannot withdraw from. And we are trying to not diminish our investments in all neighborhoods, but increase our investment in the neighborhoods of greatest need that have suffered so much before the pandemic and during the pandemic. That means we're trying to do sort of 2.5 things, at least, on a single budget, even with the great support and the stepping up by the city, by the state, by the feds, by private. What we're trying to do, what we need to do, is so pressing that, we are still, sort of too close to the edge of being able to do what we need to do. And that should not be the case at this point.
Yeah, that is well said, and exactly what we are experiencing. While there's been a real strong outpouring in private philanthropy of libraries, which has been heartening and affirming of the work that we do, sort of an indicator that people understand the services that libraries provide are really fundamentally essential services. But as we've all said now, the great bulk of our budget comes from the city. We have sustained a peg in the current fiscal year. We are thinly staffed as a result. The way that we've managed the budget cut is not to fill vacancies, and you can do that for just so long before it starts to impact the hours that we're able to stay open and the collections that we're able to provide. And I think that the really critical thing is this notion that we are, as we emerge, not only running the institutions that we were running back in March of 2020 when we shut down, but also extensive digital enterprises that we built during the pandemic and that our customers or our patrons are dependent upon and demanding for good reason, and that we will not cease to operate. So the trick is continuing to run our bricks and mortar operation, because that business is so important to the communities that they serve, but at the same time that we maintain and actually expand our digital enterprise.
Great. So selfishly, I love that there was an end to late fees. However, I know that the decision is to ensure that our city's library systems are equitable and inclusive. And it is a practice that had to end. However, late fees are part of a library's revenue. How will this impact the system's revenue? And are there any financial deficits due to the ending of late fees? Mr. Burin. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Burin?
Thank you very much, Chair. It is Burin. It's like the Great Lake, only with a B.
Gotcha.
So we have been steadily taking in less for fines and fees over the course of a few years, and certainly during the pandemic, we had waived fines and fees to begin with. So we really started weaning ourselves off from that, but we lost about $900,000 in fines and fees revenue, and where we really, what it ended up being is that in fiscal year 2020, in fiscal year 2021, we took it a lot less as well. And so we were able to wean ourselves off of it a lot, but really, more importantly, it was important for us to reprioritize what we were doing, because as you said, Chair, it was something that needed to end. And other libraries in the country have done this, but it was more not, it was a matter of economic equity to do this. What we realized that this was an investment. And so we knew that while we were losing revenue and decreasing revenue due to more people using e-materials, actually, it was an investment. More people started to use the library. We knew people weren't using the library because they were scared of fines and fees or they owed too much. And so this was a long-term investment for us that was well worth it, and that we've worked our budget to be able to use this as the right time to be able to mitigate that impact. Thank you, Chair.
Now, I was scared of using the library because of my fines and fees too. So,
Can I just jump in, Mr. Chair? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
So again, for us, similarly, $1.4 million. But that's not what to focus on. What as you said, Mr. Chair, we had in this city 1.1 million people blocked from being able to use the library, basically as an economic penalty against those who could not afford to buy their way out of it. That is not just crazy, but it is counter to everything we value. We've talked about this. For years, we've come to the city council, we've amnesties, but we never quite got to it. And the simple truth is, during the pandemic, it was unthinkable to charge fines. It was impossible to charge fines. We didn't charge fines, and we were able to absorb it in our budget. I just want to be clear. What that meant was we got to the place where we said, what is at stake in terms of our values and what's important? Let's not futz about this anymore. We didn't sit around and say, we'll wait till somebody funds it for us. We said, this is what's important right now. This is what we need to do. And this speaks to our values, and it speaks to the citizenry. It wasn't because we had money sloshing around. You've already heard that. It was because it was so pressing. And I think it's a statement of the values of these institutions that we stepped up to that without any guarantees of help. Look, the truth is, it adds to the strain on our budget of trying to do everything else, but it also says we will accept that when we need to, and we will make those hard decisions and find a way to cover them, looking to you for support if you agree with us on the values we've been pursuing.
Yeah. I just would put all of this in a bit of context because this is a committee filled with so many new members. In the budget cycle, if it had been ordinary, that would have been exactly 2 years ago. We had a plan, which was to come to City Council and to ask for support to eliminate fines so that we could be true to our values and also, sort of catch up to other library systems around the country. And the pandemic sort of threw a rather large monkey wrench into all of that. And then as we started to think about, and as everybody's explained, we obviously couldn't collect fines during the pandemic because there was no place to bring your books back. So as we started to think about what we needed to do, as we began to reopen and to encourage people to bring back the collections that were, spread all over the city, it was clear that if we wanted to get people back in the habit of using their libraries, if we wanted people to get back into the routine that so many, young parents have with their children, that we needed to make sure we eliminated any barrier that was out there, and fines was the most obvious and also the most stringent that we imposed. So I think we're all proud of where we are now, but it is a strain and it is an economic hardship. As we sort of plow forward, we will figure out sort of how to live with it, but sustaining additional cuts from the city budget while we're trying to do that as well. And there are other revenue streams that were affected. The libraries, in Brooklyn's case, earned a revenue from passport services, which dried up overnight. So all of these cuts, small or large, add up, and it's really important that we get this $14 million restored.
Right. Well, the pandemic greatly impacted the library system's programming and services, forcing the libraries to quickly shift their resources and operations to accommodate a world during COVID. Despite this shift, libraries have proven to be invaluable resources in aiding communities and providing critical resources during the pandemic. As COVID rates are decreasing and the pandemic situation is more stabilized than in 2020, thankfully, have the library systems reopened at full capacity? If so, what programming and services are back in operation? And President Johnson, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are open now in every library that's not being renovated at the moment, and that's a big step. And we are resuming in library programming as well as continuing the virtual programming. We're starting to host larger cultural events, which is welcome, so welcome. And also, I think that as we move forward, we will, in fact, the Brooklyn Public Library is going through a strategic planning process right now, which is an exercise in looking back, figuring out what we've learned during the pandemic and making decisions about what we would like to carry forward. And one of the lessons that we've learned and that we will, in fact, continue to do is to do outdoor programming, which has been hugely successful and provides a great model. There were some things that we were doing before the pandemic, and we've just built upon the experience that we had in many, many neighborhoods in Brooklyn. So we're thrilled to be back as strong as we are, and and as hopefully things continue to progress the way they have over the past few weeks, and with every step, we will be closer and closer to the robust services that we are well known for.
I'll just reiterate that we are fully open. Our in-person programs are fully back. They stopped again during Omicron. We're back. There's both pent-up need and demand, and we see that across the board. We also see that everyone is sort of coming back based on their own individual level of comfort, and that varies. And there's a sort of transition process. We're still here on Zoom, Mr. Chairman, so we're all still sort of figuring out how to get out of this more fully. We're also, I think we all agree that there are neighborhoods that, we need to pay more attention to, put more resources in, more programs. Bless you. We've revised our, we've used the opportunity to tweak our after school programs so that they're more broadly available, they're more readily available in the branches, the STEM programs, all the adult education. We know how much New Yorkers rely on it. We see this in terms of the demand. We also know that we need to be here, and we also need to help New Yorkers feel comfortable again, coming back. And that's still taking a bit of time just for people to get to that personal comfort level.
Here at Queens, all of our available locations are open, which is 59 at the moment. The ones that are not open are renovations, infrastructure issues, or serving other purposes. We have 34 libraries that are offering 6-day service and 24 that are offering 5-day service. We recently opened the Far Rockaway Teen Library. We also recently reopened the Queensbridge Tech Lab as well. But in order to expand from 5 days service at those locations to 6-day service throughout the borough, we need to fill vacant positions, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic and higher retirement numbers. In 2021 alone, we had nearly 100 staff members leave the organization, of which 44 of those were retirements. When we can fill those positions with the adequate funding from the administration and the city council, we would be able to bring ourselves back to pre-pandemic levels. Thank you.
And Mr. Buren, just a follow-up, were there any employees that have been laid off during the pandemic? And if so, how will the layoffs, in addition to the headcount loss due to the PEGs, impact the library system's ability to continue providing resources to our communities?
Thank you. With the number of staff that are voluntarily leaving and retirements, we've had no layoffs at the Queens Public Library.
Wow. And President Johnson?
Yeah, the same for us. We at no time during the pandemic did we furlough or lay off any full-time employees.
President Marks?
Exactly the same.
That's amazing. Kudos to
I think it's about, we all said this is a value. I mean, I said this is not a moment where you throw people, by the wayside. To the contrary, the whole approach, and the union was crucial in this, is like, let's get together and let's get through this together and figure out how we can do that. And I think, there have been hard moments for everybody, but I think that's been the real thrust here.
And by the way, that was only possible because of steadfast city support. So we're very grateful that we were able to carry that through.
Wonderful. Well, let's move on to some more fun, even though I'm having some thus far. Capital projects. Libraries can serve as crucial community open spaces and provide technology resources such as free Wi-Fi and computers to community members that do not have access. To me, I do believe that libraries are some of the only public spaces in New York City, period, especially year-round. Yet most libraries have outdated infrastructure and technology. How are the systems addressing last year's ongoing capital projects and balancing them with this year's projects? And if projects have stopped because of the pandemic, have they restarted?
All of our projects have restarted. We have $342 million of active projects, 47 projects. I can go through them in particular. We did not sort of hit pause on this at all. Only very briefly. And in fact, I think working with the city administration to find more solutions, whether it's affordable housing on top of libraries, whether it's getting us in the 10-year capital plan at the level that we need, whether it's thinking about DDC and revisions of all that. I think the capital work is, again, we have systematic problems that we are talking finally with the administration about, and finally that it's wonderfully to figure out how we can solve the systemic problems that continue to plague us and make it so hard. But the actual progress has been happening in terms of construction. Again, in a sense, that's, if you will, easier just to be able to do that than the hiring, which, as my colleagues have said, yes, we need the buildings, but we also crucially need the folks, the amazing librarians and clerical staff and all the staff. That's our bread and butter. And, that's where, even with the funding, we're all suffering through the problem of having a hard time recruiting and hiring as we lose people to retirements. And, we know we can't lose that battle because that's the essential one together with that.
I don't know that there's a lot more to add. I would say that there's two sides to this story. During the pandemic, we were able to get dispensation to continue with certain projects, which was terrific. And so in some cases, we ended up ahead of schedule. And so the projects that move forward were the large capital projects, complete gut renovations, new projects. And those projects are, in many cases, they exist because at one time we were included in the city's 10-year plan. And so there had been money that was allocated to do that work. And so those are the projects that move forward. And that's why it's so critical that we get back in the 10-year plan when we're able to do that. On the other side of the coin, are the capital, the deferred maintenance, the smaller projects, the HVAC systems, the roofs, all of those things that create uncertainty in the buildings and create problems for the people who work and want to be there. And those are what is kind of, those are the things that keep me up at night. And they're things that we kind of just keep kicking the can down the road until it becomes untenable. Then we have an emergency. So we're spending money at rates that are much greater than we should because we're not doing the preventative work that we could be doing to sort of address the problems when they initially arise. And that's really where we need to kind of shake things up and make a difference.
Mr. Chairman, can I just reiterate that, the DDC issue, because it costs twice as much, takes twice as long, we end up with shortfalls as the projects take longer, even in the big projects.
Right.
A third of our capital budget right now is allocated to cover the shortfalls rather than to actually move our capital agenda in the way that. That's another indication.
Yeah.
And the city administration understands this. I know the city council understands this. We have to solve this system problem.
Yeah. And there's one thing that's even worse, and then we should, we're beating a dead horse, but the problem is that when we hit a shortfall on a project, sometimes in order to continue moving it forward, because time is not a friend to these projects, we, what's the expression? We, rob Peter to pay Paul, and we take money from the operating budget where we really don't have any money to give so that we can keep the project moving ahead. And that's really awful.
So what my colleagues have said are pre-pandemic problems as well. So these are the problems that were before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and unless they're addressed post-pandemic. And to address the specific question, we've had no remarkable issues encountered in terms of restarting projects. And according to DDC's February 2022 Public Buildings Report, there are approximately 37 active projects for Queens Public Library, and none of them are on pause.
I just want to ask one more question before I move on to my amazing colleagues. But how are the systems ensuring equity and determining capital priorities? Is that something that exists, or is it solely based off of how big the projects are?
I wish that we could say that it was all about equity. It's some of it is about sort of the emergency nature of a project, as opposed to where the project might be located. As we do work that we manage ourselves, what we call pass-through projects, and we have control over who we hire to do the work. We're making sure that we're hiring vendors that are, women and minority-owned businesses. So there's some, to the extent we have control, there's some equity that's going on there. But if we could plan better, we certainly would be in a situation where we could be doing a better job of considering the location of a library, not just the condition of the library.
Totally agreed. Look, when we're dealing with putting out fires, then you have to put out a fire wherever it is. So when the boiler goes or the roof goes, it's hard to be equitable in that, though. Probably that happens more in the low income neighborhoods because those is where we haven't been keeping up with capital, needs consistently. This is all craziness. When we get, as Linda said, and as Nick will say, when we get the investment that enables us to plan and to be efficient, which is sort of basic, right? Amazing that we should have to fight for that. We can and do allocate those resources in, the less well-off neighborhoods because we know that that's where the gap is, both in terms of past capital investments and in terms of current capital and program needs. So when we got into the 10-year capital plan, we picked 5 Carnegies in the, poorest, less well-developed neighborhoods of New York and said, let's totally redo those, something we couldn't have done before. When we talk to private donors about partnerships that can lead to new libraries together with affordable housing, of course, that's all looking at where are the neighborhoods in need so that we can prioritize those. But if we do not have a system that works, and if we do not have capital in that system to make it work, we cannot, it is impossible to make those kinds of priority decisions because then we're just reacting to the crisis of the day, right?
I would just add one thing, and that is as we think about these large renovation projects that we're doing, we're making sure that we spread them out across the borough, that we're doing them in every corner of the borough, that we're not doing it all in one district or all in another. There's a lot that goes into that planning that's much more strategic. It's really about the emergencies that are just being addressed on a case-by-case basis.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that I have for the 3 of you. It's always a pleasure speaking and seeing both of you, President Marks and President Johnson. It was nice to meet you this afternoon, Chief Buron. I know that Brenda maybe got kicked off of this Zoom. So
I can assist you, Chair.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask if any council members have questions, so please use the Zoom raise hand function. And you will be called upon to ask your questions. We have one hand from Council Member Hanif. Please wait for the sergeant to start your 5-minute clock. As you're speaking, I'll work on getting Brenda back into this hearing.
Thank you. Start now.
Thank you. Hi, all. I'm, of course, super grateful to our libraries and recognize that they must continue to be effective community hubs during our COVID recovery. And we've got to expand on all the creative opportunity that lie ahead and continue to do the good work that you've been doing during COVID across all the changes and the new programming that have been incorporated to continue serving all New Yorkers. So I've got a couple of questions and I want to start off revisiting what came up in the questioning with Chair Osei. I'm concerned about the reports of increased staff resignations. Can you identify why this is occurring and what steps are needed to reverse this trend?
I'll start. I wish we had a better understanding of it. I think it's not just in our sector, it's across the city. There's this great resignation and we're not immune from it. We typically have experienced really long serving staff. We have a guy who unfortunately passed away recently, but he was still working for us when he was 85 years old. So this is not the norm for us. And I think people are just making decisions about their lives that are based upon different things than they once did. And in terms of dealing with it, right now we're staying lean because we're absorbing a peg. But as soon as we have some funding, we'll be doing some heavy recruitment. It's already begun. We've already started to attend some library conferences where we think we might be sort of fertile ground, but we're gearing up for that.
I will only add that we are eager for the city administration to negotiate successfully a new contract with DC 37 that will include a significant increase so that we can be more competitive as we try to hire, and because our amazing staff deserve that.
Nick, did you want to share something?
Only to say that I wanted to concur with my colleagues is that we are not immune from the realities of the workforce throughout the country, and especially wanted to reiterate what Tony said, is that we must be competitive. Our three systems are great places to work. They're mission-driven organizations, but that doesn't mean that the people that work for us should have less competitive salaries in the private sector, and we have to be able to address that in order to be competitive and to hire the staff that we need to have as much service as possible for our communities.
And to the hard jobs, Councilman. I mean, these are, we're asking people to do essential work, public service, helping people with the diversity of New York, which is its strength, also means we have to be ready to handle that diversity and diverse needs in the library.
And for the bulk of our staff, we have been asking them to be on the front line when many people were working remotely. They have the kinds of jobs that require them to be in public-facing situations throughout the pandemic. So,
right. No, I'm happy that you raised that library workers are essential workers, and we've got to make sure that they are earning a living and competitive pay. Then I'll be an advocate, with this committee, of course. And I want to move into the next question that I have that speaks to the issue of workers, because again, essential workers led programming and some of the non-traditional partnerships that you all cultivated, including with Test and Trace, what other non-traditional partnerships would additional funding allow libraries to pursue?
Wow. Well, that question limits us only to the extent that our imaginations are limited. So I think, one of the things that we've learned in the pandemic is the importance of staying close to the community. And if we had some more money to hire, I think we're eager to get more navigators in our branches, people who are going out into the community to strengthen those ties and to hear firsthand what kind of services they need. Throughout the pandemic, a lot of it had to do with public health issues and internet access issues. And, in my testimony, I spoke a bit about both of those things.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate. I mean, I think we know that we need more focused and effective after school and other supplementaries, especially in particular neighborhoods, to help the kids make up for what's been lost in these last 2 years. That accords with, of course, the mayor's focus on kids and teens and really sort of doubling down there. We know that that adult education is even more important going forward because of all the economic changes, the need to skill up, the need for technology, and we're the best and biggest at that. As Linda said, we can play a significant role in solving the digital divide. We're all trying to be creative in that. If it was outrageous, 2 years before that 2 million New Yorkers don't have broadband at home, it's now, it just should be impossible that is the case, and yet it still is the case. I mean, there's all of that still to do. The mayor has talked to us, to the city as a whole, about how do we bring communities together? How do we give folks a sense of agency so that they can come together to solve problems, to work with you, their elected officials, to work with the bureaucracy, because we're in every neighborhood, because we're trusted, because everyone uses us? Can we play a role in helping that sort of repairing the damage that has been inflicted on the sort of civic body, if you will? there's so much that we are doing and that we can do and that we're excited to do because we need to do it.
And one thing that we sort of is woven throughout what both Tony and I are talking about is making sure that, that our patrons have the skills that they need to be, adequately and in a fulfilling way employed. Tech skills are so important these days, both for kids and for adults. But I think that teen tech work really will be a focus for us.
I think I saw Nick's hand, but I see that I'm out of time, and Cheryl say I do have 2 more questions. Are we going to do a second round of questioning, or would you like me to proceed?
You could proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Nick, you want? I don't.
Yes, Councilman. Thank you, Council Member. I just want to say it's the big communities that we're looking to serve, whether it's those in temporary housing, whether it's incarcerated adults, whether it's immigrants, whether it's those that need basic education, whether it's after school. Those are the big pots, and we're best served by working with community organizations to leverage, have them leverage us, have us leverage them to be able to provide. There's a lot of work to be done in our city, and we're not going to do it alone, but we are excellent at being that hub on the wheel to be able to bring organizations together and bring communities together to be able to magnify, we're more than the sum of our parts. And so we would like to have more parts to be more of the sum.
Thank you so much. Tony went into this a little bit around just expanding adult literacy programming and expanding the budget for adult literacy courses and curriculum is going to be a big priority for the committee I chair, immigration. How would additional funding for adult literacy allow your programs to better serve students?
Go ahead, Nick. You want to go first?
I feel like Nick.
I have to keep coming off of mute. I keep muting myself, so please excuse me. As you very well know, we are a city of immigrants, and here in Queens, about 50% of the borough was born outside the United States. We are a vital institution when it comes to new immigrants. We turn away people who want to come to our free adult education and our English our ESOL programs, because we just don't have the staffing and we just don't have the facilities to be able to do it. And so in order to use our current facilities and keep them open longer, we need the staffing levels to be able to do that. We don't want to turn anyone away. And yet, we provide some of the best opportunities for people to not only come here for the classes themselves, but then be able to take advantage of all the other opportunities that we have at the library. It's a one-stop shop for people who are new to the community and need to be able to improve not only their language skills, but also their business skills, their job employment skills. And we can do that through contextualized adult learning. More money, if that's what I heard you say, more money means more teachers. Because again, it goes back to what we were talking about before, is that the resources that we get in the form of a budget pays for the most important thing that we have, and that is our staff. Staffing leads to the programs that we can do. And when it comes to, immigrant learning, it's those people that make those interpersonal connections that really help our community.
Thank you. And then Tony, did you want to add on?
Keep going.
I know these are exciting questions. I'm excited listening to your responses, really. I believe in just the vastness of what libraries can accomplish for our communities, and particularly for our immigrant communities. What tactics, just going into a little bit of like outreach and community engagement. I know, Linda, you mentioned that like having more funding would allow you to have a dedicated navigator or navigators to pursue more intentional outreach. In the meantime, what tactics are you using to inform constituents about newer programs like the ebook and audiobook availability and other programming?
Actually, thank you. You kind of gave me a great question that I can brag about. We have a new campaign that we're about to launch, just making sure that puts the libraries back in people's mind as a place to go for resources, and that'll be starting in the next month as we get into spring. We're taking full advantage of every avenue. So we're doing a lot on social media. Of course, that doesn't hit everybody, and then just making sure that in every library there's a lot of information, both coming from the staff, but also just from material around the library about what programs are available and when they're being held. But yeah, we have a strong group that is working hard to bring everyone back and to inform everybody fully about the great resources that we have to offer.
So ditto, marketing, going out, to NYCHA, to homeless areas, bringing our programs there, using book giveaways to bring people back in, the Welcome Week activities. I mean, all of it. We are pulling out the stops on this. And I agree with Linda, and I'm sure Nick will say the same. We are doing a lot, and we need to do more. And let me just say this, which may surprise you. I don't think we know fully how to do this. I think we are doing everything we can, but let's just be honest. Before the pandemic, in the South Bronx compared to the Upper West Side, the kids on the Upper West Side on average were borrowing 3 times as many books as in the South Bronx, and they probably have more books at home already. So that was the start before the pandemic, right? The neighborhoods in the South Bronx, neighborhoods like that, have less digital access. So even though we were doing 10 million ebook lends, it was less going into those neighborhoods. The simple fact is we are doing everything we can. And I think we just need to be honest and say, we need to get creative as a society, as a city, to say, how do we get the folks who should be using us more, who are actually using us less, for that to change fundamentally? And I think we see that. And I'm not suggesting we're not doing and trying everything. I'm just saying, I need to confess, this is hard. This is hard.
Who makes those decisions though, Tony, in terms of how to cultivate the outreach?
Yeah, I would like to take a slightly different bent on this. I think I want to give a big shout out to our government affairs team and our community relations guys who are going to community boards and reporting there. Anybody who invites them anywhere, and by the way, please feel free to do that. I mean, we're sending bookmobiles and techmobiles into every neighborhood. I mean, we are, when I was in business school, we talked about guerrilla marketing. That might date me, but we're guerrillas out there. We are like seriously trying to make sure that we're engaging anyone and everyone who will listen to us.
I totally agree. We're up against a sociological problem, right? That is huge, that we just have to be honest about, right?
It's a multi-pronged approach for many of us, and that's, of course, it's a centralized marketing, whether that be social media or through our website, but it's also at the individual locations for them to go out to their neighborhoods and really sell the services that we're providing to people who don't use us. But also we're relying, as Linda said, on community boards to get our word out. That's why we'll go out there to them, really profess ourselves to them so that they could talk to their constituents. It's the local newspapers that we invite as much as possible to see the great things that they're doing, to push that out to their constituents. So it's a multi-pronged approach in order to, and it's continuous. Doing it last month does not mean get us off the hook for next month.
Thank you so much. I've learned a lot. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you so much. We will now go to Councilmember Brewer, followed by Councilmember Ferris.
Thank you very much. It's great to be part of this discussion. My first question is just the hours. My friend Harvey, who was head of operations under Dinkins, some of you remember, he has a saying, which is the reason our city doesn't do, what Councilmember Hannaf and others were stating, which is Why don't people go to the libraries all the time? Why don't we have more people? It's because nobody knows when they're open. You have to have a library just like supposedly the subway or the bus. It just has to be there all the time. You shouldn't have to look up the hours. You shouldn't have to wonder if it's open. That would make a big difference. Harvey always, he met me other day and he said, Gail, the libraries, so what is the number that we need to hit for a real 7 day a week? Not, okay, I think it's 1 to 6 on Saturday, maybe it's 1 to 6 on Sunday. Is there a number for that we should be striving for? I'm talking about 8 to 8 or,
I would love to be open all night long in some locations.
I would agree with that. And I'm tired of us, okay, we can only do this, we can only do that. Libraries, it's business, it's literacy, it's after school. It is the only place that's free for all of these services. And we should stop messing around with shortchanging the libraries.
I think, first of all, welcome back. It's wonderful to have you back. And
I feel like a freaking institution, but I appreciate that, Linda. I've heard this before 100.
You have.
It was just in Manhattan, Linda.
I've heard this since 1978.
Yeah, you could be giving our testimony, I suspect. But I will say
we want at least a number to know what a real 7 day a week. We don't have to check to know what time the library is open. It's open.
I have there's a conflicting thing here. I, on the one hand, would like to be open all the time. And on the other hand, I want to be responsible about how we do it and make sure that the hours we're open are hours that people actually want us to be there for them. And so there's not necessarily a cookie cutter approach. I think that the original Carnegie Compact, had us open 12 hours a day. That's a lot of hours. And I'm not sure that necessarily makes sense given the sort of complexity of people's lives today. But I would really love to be able to say that in those neighborhoods where it makes sense, we will be open all night if that's in fact going to improve the quality of the service and the number of people who will take advantage of what we offer. And I would like to go neighborhood by neighborhood. We're trying to do that now. In some neighborhoods, it makes more sense to have longer hours on Sunday than it does on Saturday. In other neighborhoods, it's exactly the opposite. And the key is to listening hard and getting it right and having the budget in order to execute on it.
Okay. What I'm saying is whatever I agree with you. I mean, depending on the Saturday, Sunday, I know that only too well. But the issue is the public shouldn't have to, as Harvey keeps reminding me, wonder if the library is open.
Well, the key to that is to be consistent. So if you say you're going to be open for this block of time, that in fact, you always are.
I agree, but it should be a little bit across the board. So if you're moving between places.
Council member, you are
yes.
You're absolutely correct. It's funny that you mentioned, Mayor Dinkins, because it's because of Mayor Dinkins that I was hired.
Because of Harvey, I work for Mayor Dinkins. It's because of Harvey. I'm just saying.
I understand, but
I love Mayor Dinkins. May he rest in peace, but it's because of Harvey. Go ahead. And Richard Murphy. Those are the two.
And it's thanks to the administration,
yes.
Dinkins administration, that I was hired over 28 years ago because they wanted to bring back 6 day service.
That's
and
Harvey.
So what this does is we have to build up to this. And so right now we would not even have enough staff right now to be able to have 7 day service. But I do remember as a librarian that we had 7 day service at every council district.
Right.
And so we have to build up to that. And quite honestly, because of the funding that we need funding just to get up to 6 day service.
This is the problem, Nick. What I want from you is the number that would require whatever you, Linda, Tony agree for your library services, 7 day a week, obviously with some caveats. This one wants this Saturday and this one wants Sunday. Although even though you got an Orthodox community, you still got people in there who, they like to go to different days, etc.
Well, and as you likely know, Sunday service for us is a time and a half. So we need enough staff in our 6 day service to be able to
I
offer
agree.
7-day service and pay them in cash. So your question is excellent, and we would like to get back to you with an actual number
Thank
of
you.
what that looks like to have 7-day service, and then understand that we have to build up to that in the staffing level.
It's Harvey Robbins, Robins. Go ahead,
Thank you.
Tony. Did you want to say something?
No, I just reiterate that, it's about the staffing. It's about having.
I know, but then put the money in for the staffing. Everything goes in that number.
And the overtime adds to that in this case, but.
That's okay. You put it in.
Got that?
Number two, maybe you discussed this already, because I'm sorry, I'm also on the night to hearing chair. I apologize. I think you are too. You're being slick too. You're going on both. So the issue is the tech. It's a 5-year constant change because of the fact that technology doesn't last very long. So I guess my question is, how do we look at technology for the libraries? Is it just capital? Is there other ways in which we should be looking at the technology for the libraries? Mostly I'm thinking about for the patrons. I don't know, I'm just asking kind of a general question, because it is what I wish they all went for books, but I wanted to just think a little bit about the technology, what that looks like in terms of capital for the future.
Well, I think it is a constant need, Gail, as you know, and we had some change in rules at the controller level that made it more flexible. That was essential and
Okay, that's helpful.
But I do think it never stops, right? And we need to keep going and replenishing and upgrading. And as others have said, we need to connect that to it's not just devices; it's the skills to use the device, which is why the public libraries are the largest free computer skill training, especially for adults in the city. And it's about connectivity and broadband connectivity, which, it's just, it's beyond a scandal that we're even still talking about the fact that 1 million or 2 million New Yorkers don't have connectivity. They can't use the library online. If they can't get online, they can't even do their jobs or go to school. And that's another example of where we need to solve this problem, and the library should be a partner, is a partner.
Okay.
And the three systems really understand that technology is not the endpoint. The technology is the tool to get to better jobs, to get to better education, to get to, lifting up our communities. So the tool has to keep changing. Tony said it very well. It's like it's building the skills so that you could use any tool to continue to build. And that skills comes from, adequate staffing, which came back to what you said earlier.
Do you still get E-rate money? And then you're not allowed to be a hub for the neighborhood, right? Because then you lose your E-rate. Is that still the situation?
We get E-rate, and we are using our libraries to extend Wi-Fi signals. We're all the largest providers of Wi-Fis in our boroughs, free Wi-Fi. And we're all working at extending those signals out into the neighborhoods.
All right, so you haven't been, you have to get permission from the FAA, FTC, or whatever, FAA, right? You have
What's that expression? You ask for forgiveness, not for permission. Yeah.
But you haven't gotten it from the federal government yet to be able to extend out into the communities. Because I've testified, they've always said no, but maybe they're changing their minds.
I don't know that it's an issue.
I think this is an ongoing negotiation. Let us come back to you on that.
All right, I'd like to know about that. And then just finally, maybe you talked about DDC, they charge you too much, or they still?
Yeah, no, we did talk about this. I mean,
okay. They say they don't, and I say they do. So just an ongoing
No
discussion.
one's going to disagree with you on that, Council.
They do, Gail. I think we'll
talk about it later. All right, thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, and then we will finally go to, this is the last council member. If any other council members have questions, please raise your hand in Zoom. We will go to Council Member Farias. Thank you so much.
No.
Hi, good afternoon. That was a very animated discussion. I have to check and make sure some of my questions were answered. I did have a public Wi-Fi question. So thank you for saying you'll get back to us on expansion and community use. I'm really interested in discussing around the council initiatives, and I did pop out a couple times, so please let me know if you have already answered some of these. So in fiscal year 2022, the City Council allocated one-time funding of $14 million split between the three systems. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on how some of that was used? And then I think I'd like to learn about the council's role and the libraries are playing in implementing the city's first reader initiatives or any of the initiatives if you want to like dive a little deeper into them.
I'll just start. Of the $14 million that the three library systems got, the Queens Public Library got $3.9 million. We used ours for vital non-capitally eligible maintenance and critical maintenance that can only be used through operational money and not capital money. We did it to support staffing levels as well, to help with programming, and to buy increased materials, which this would be a great opportunity to say that e-materials cost about 5 times more than a printed book. And so that anytime that we're buying e-material, it's much more expensive. And so extra funding where we have to maintain print collections as well as vital e-collections is something that will cost us money in the long term, but that's how we used our money at Queens Public Library. Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up before anyone else jumps in. Is that because of like propriety and its use, or why is it 5 times more expensive? Sure, you can go ahead. Oh, he needs to be unmuted, Sergeant.
Sorry, I keep muting myself.
It's okay, it's habit.
I've been used to it after a couple of years. That's what you do, but there's a process here. That you have asked an excellent question, and I'm so glad that you've asked that question, because why is it 5 times more when we're renting these ebooks? We don't own hardly any of these e-materials. We're renting them for either 26 circulations or 2 years, and we don't own it. And so this is a much bigger question that you've asked about how do we make e-material more affordable for public libraries so that we can buy more for our public, but they are proprietary, whereas when we buy a book, we get to keep it. And when it's had its life use, we could sell it for, as we do for an online vendor, to get money to buy more books. But when it comes to e-material, we don't own it. And so the price, you have jumped into a very interesting topic that I wish as President Mark said, I wish I could give you a really good answer to that one. But it's elusive because it is the publishers and the online vendors that are charging us what they're charging us, and they have a monopoly on this content.
Got it. Maybe Council Chair Osei and I can talk offline with y'all about this to see if this is a state or federal thing we can push. I'm sorry, does Linda or Tony, would you like to jump in on the previous question or this one? Linda, you're not muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Happens once a day. On like Queens, the Brooklyn Public Library is $3.9 million, and unfortunately, it doesn't take long to spend that. But it's basically staffing, programming, materials, branch spruce ups. We do participate in the city's first readers program. We have virtual story times in 11 languages, Ready, Set, Kindergarten in Spanish and English, book refresh in collections. So, nothing particularly out of the ordinary that we use that funding for, but all, profoundly fundamental and important.
And quickly, of our 6.1 million from the city council, we spent 3.4 on library materials, 2.5 on facilities, maintenance and cleaning, and 170,000 as agreed with the council on the temporary space for the Inwood branch while we're building the new branch and the affordable housing on top. The ebooks issue is a huge issue. I'd be delighted to dive in with you. The New York Public Library is, I think, fair to say, the biggest sort of actor, nationally on this. We have our own Simply E app, which is important because we think the libraries need to control this ecosystem, ensure privacy, and be able to negotiate with authors and publishers so that we get the rights without being gouged and still protect the interests of authors and publishers to make a fair return so that we continue to have creativity. But we lent 10 or 11 million ebooks during the pandemic. We've negotiated with Google to get 4 million books available to potentially anyone in the world. I mean, this is a huge issue, and it's also an issue that involves not only how do you ensure that you can offer it, but how do you make sure that people are taking you up on it? And that's the marketing side and the outreach side. So this is a whole ecosystem that's emerging and developing, and all three systems are deeply in this.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, I definitely wasn't something I thought it would come up today, but it's, if we're kind of like renting the books from you to read and you're renting the books on a use basis or a time basis, it's kind of counterproductive to making sure folks have access to it. And the cost is definitely inhibiting, better uses of dollars. Chair Osei, can I ask a capital question really quickly?
Sure.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask some around some of the capital projects. I'm really excited to see that the Castle Hill branch in my district has an allocation, an ongoing project for renovation to the branch of 8.3 million. But I really wanted to know, how are the systems addressing last year's ongoing capital projects and balancing them with this year's projects, and have all of the capital projects that were halted due to the pandemic, have they restarted?
So I could start. Everything has not just restarted, but has been restarted and gaining steam. We have 47 projects at the moment in the Bronx alone. We have 18 projects for $137 million. We have completed a whole set of projects, including in the Bronx and Morrisania. We're doing our 5 Carnegies, and those include Hunts Point, Melrose. We're doing construction on the new Westchester Square. I mean, so, really this is moving, but as we've said, there are systemic problems that we need to solve so that we can maintain and build this momentum and not keep running into the same structural issues that we have. And I think the administration is ready to have that conversation in a way that perhaps we've never been ready before. And that would be amazing.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, or you're okay?
I would just reiterate what I said before, that we have 37 active projects right now with DDC as of today. None of them are on pause. They are moving ahead at their own pace.
Beautiful. Great. Well, thank you all for testifying today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And at this point, Chair, no other council members have raised their hands to ask questions.
Brenda, I do have one more question, if that's okay. And this is for President Marks. Is your background a green screen or a real background? Oh, wow. That's all.
This office was built, for this 100 and some odd years ago. But actually, the thing to really come now to this building for is the treasures exhibit, because after 125 years, all these amazing things that basically we've kept in a safe are now available for the public. I was with a school group this morning. We want every school to come and visit. Never mind the office, come and see the treasures. It's amazing.
Amazing. Thank you. Back to you, Brenda.
All right, thank you, Chair. So we do not have any other raised hands for council member questions for the library section. So Chair, this would conclude the library's testimony portion of the hearing, and we'd move to cultural affairs. If you're ready.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
Right. Thank you. And then Chair, so we will go to you and begin the cultural affairs portion of the hearing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon again to those of you that were on the previous part of our hearing, and welcome to this hearing for the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. Again, I am Councilmember Chi Osei, Chair of this committee. This afternoon, we will be discussing the fiscal 2023 preliminary expense budget for DCLA, which stands at $145.5 million, and the fiscal 2023 preliminary capital commitment plan, which includes $1.3 million in fiscal 2022 to 2026 for the department. At the urging of the council, the administration added approximately $30 million at adoption of the fiscal 2022 plan. The funding included $11 million for the Cultural Institution Group, SIG, $17 million for Cultural Development Fund, the CDF, and $2 million for agency initiatives. The council is disappointed that the funding is not included in the fiscal 2023 preliminary plan. The preliminary budget includes cuts that include total $3.4 million in fiscal 2022 and $4.5 million in out years achieved through cuts in Create NYC funding, CDF funding, CIG supplemental funds, and other programmatic initiatives. Disappointed to see cuts at a time, I'm very disappointed to see cuts at a time when cultural organizations are struggling and need funding the most. In the fiscal 2022 adopted plan, there was $12.6 million in federal funding for City Artist Corps in the agency's budget. This program supported New York City-based working artists who were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The total funding for the program was $25 million, of which $12.4 million was managed by other agencies. This funding is not reflected in the fiscal 2023 preliminary plan. How does the agency plan to ensure that our artists are provided continued support in fiscal 2023? It is the council's responsibility to ensure that the city's budget is fair, transparent, and accountable to New Yorkers. Hence, as the chair of the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations, I will continue to push for accountability and accuracy and ensure that the budget reflects the needs and interests of the city. It is essential that the budget that we adopt this year, again, is transparent, accountable, and reflective of the priorities and interests of the council and the people we represent. This hearing is a vital part of the process, and I expect that DCLA will be responsive to the questions and concerns of council members. I look forward to an active engagement with the administration over the next few months to ensure that the fiscal 2023 adopted budget meets the goals that the council has set out. And I do want to go off script for a second because, you know, we are in a time where we're almost about to hit, we are in our third March since the pandemic hit. And as we realized or found out last week with many of the lifts from the mask mandates and some of these vaccine mandates, that this new administration is trying to bring New York back. And I do want to acknowledge that if we are going to bring this city back, we cannot do it without our cultural institutions. Just a rough statistic, but about 25% of the tourists that come to the city come because of our cultural institutions, our cultural organizations. And if we're going to fiscally rebuild the city and bring it back to the way that it was before the pandemic, then we'll need our cultural institutions to be at the forefront of that conversation. And as chair of this committee, it is just disheartening to see that there is a proposed cut to our cultural institutions. And I will do everything that I can as a council member and as chair of this committee to push back as much as I can to make sure that those cuts don't even happen. And not only cuts, but we replenish the budget to what it was before the pandemic, and maybe even go further and fund it more than it was during the pandemic. I would also like to recognize the members of this committee who are present just for this section of the hearing. So Councilmember Brewer is with us, Councilmember Farias, Councilmember Joseph, Councilmember Lewis, Councilmember Hanif, and Councilmember Ung. Thank you so much for being here. And again, I would also like to thank my staff for organizing today's hearing, including committee councils, Brenda McKinney, legislative policy analyst, Christy Dwyer, and principal financial analyst, Alia Ali. And I also do want to thank and acknowledge my staff, my budget and legislative director, May Vutrapong Vitana. Brenda, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. So hello, everyone. And for the benefit of those who were not here for the libraries portion, my name is Brenda McKinney, and I am the counsel to the New York City Council's Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. Before we begin today, I'd like to remind everyone you will be on mute until you are recognized to speak. Just some housekeeping items, at which time you'll be unmuted by the Zoom host. If you mute yourself after you have been unmuted, you need to be unmuted again by the host. Please be aware that there will be a delay in muting and unmuting, so please be patient and also be aware that a little box pops up for you to click. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function and you will be called on to speak. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, including responses. We will be calling on council members in the order that they raise their hands in Zoom. We're going to hear now from Cultural Affairs, the Department of Cultural Affairs. So I will now administer the oath or the affirmation to all of the DCLA Department of Cultural Affairs witnesses, including those that are here available for question and answer. If all of you, I know several people are in the same room, if you could just come on camera so we can see you, and we'll just unmute. I'll just call your names and then we'll just unmute you now. Thank you so much. So first is Sheila Feinberg, DCLA Deputy Commissioner. Next is Pranita Raghavan, DCLA General Counsel.
Yep.
Next is Shirley Levy, DCLA Chief of Staff.
I do.
And finally, Philippa Shao, DCLA Director of Finance.
I do.
Thank you so much. Deputy Commissioner Feinberg, you may begin your testimony when ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Osei and members of the committee. I am Sheila Feinberg, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs. I'm here to testify in regard to the Mayor's proposed fiscal year 2023 preliminary budget. I'm joined by several of my colleagues from the agency, including Chief of Staff Shirley Levy, General Counsel Pranita Raghavan, and Finance Director Philippa Shao. To begin, let me say I'm thrilled to see so many new faces on the Council's Cultural Affairs Committee. Our cultural community deserves dedicated, energetic advocates in city government. I am looking forward to working with you to do everything we can to support this essential aspect of what makes our city great. With this in mind, I'd like to start with a quick overview of the Department of Cultural Affairs work and mission. We are the largest municipal supporter of culture in the United States, providing funding and technical assistance to over 1,000 cultural nonprofits each year. We distribute annual grants to support cultural programming through the Cultural Development Fund. We provide operating and energy subsidies to organizations on DCLA-owned property, including the 34 members of the Cultural Institutions Group. We provide capital funding to support equipment and construction projects at hundreds of organizations. Our public art unit is dedicated to both permanent and temporary installations on city property. And our Materials for the Arts program, based in Long Island City, provides free supplies to cultural organizations, artists, city agencies with arts programming, and public schools. We do all of this with a small but passionate team of nearly 50 public servants dedicated to working with our constituents in all 5 boroughs. In recent years, our staff has found far-reaching ways to build greater equity into our programs and services. Not only have we sought to encourage and foster a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive cultural workforce, but we've also worked to ensure the agency's funding and services are reaching historically underserved communities around the city. As we've witnessed the damage the pandemic has caused to our most vulnerable neighbors, particularly in the communities of color, we've strived to take this work even further. We believe that art and culture have the power to connect with and uplift every New Yorker, and we're committed to working with partners across the cultural community, including you, to continue building on the progress we've made. With that brief context for our work, I'll now provide an overview of Mayor Adams' fiscal year 23 preliminary budget for DCLA. The total expense funding allocated to the agency is $145.2 million, which includes $28.5 million for the Cultural Development Fund, $107.1 million for the Cultural Institutions Group, $1.25 million for energy subsidies to groups on DCLA property, $6.2 million for agency operations, and a little over $2 million for additional agency programs and initiatives. Please note that at this stage in the process, these figures don't include any one-time allocations typically added at budget adoption. In the mayor's preliminary budget proposal, the Department of Cultural Affairs continues to invest in our city's cultural community while finding savings and efficiencies along with our colleagues across city government. There is no recovery. I will echo what Chair Osei said. There is no recovery for New York City without culture, and we look forward to working with partners on the collaborative budget process in the months ahead. Now I'd like to take a few minutes to provide a few recent and upcoming highlights from the agency. Our amazing team at Materials for the Arts recently launched the Great Dance Shoe Giveaway, offering 11,000 pairs of free dance shoes to schools, dancers, and dance groups. Since we cut the golden shoestring just 2 weeks ago, so far roughly 9,000 shoes have gone to 250 schools and arts organizations across the 5 boroughs. This has brought a welcome boost to performing artists around the city as stages and studios continue to return to life. If you know of anyone who could use the shoes, visit nyc.gov/MFTA to schedule an appointment to get some. As part of the agency's fiscal year 22 Cultural Development Fund, we partnered for the second year with the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable to offer $1,000 unrestricted relief grants to arts educators around the city. Our COVID-19 impact surveys of the cultural field found that arts educators, who are an essential link between our city's cultural riches and our young people, were particularly hard hit by pandemic layoffs and furloughs. The application period for the 3rd round of the relief fund opened yesterday and closes on March 21st. So please help us spread the word to anyone who could benefit. The CUNY Cultural Corps, a program we helped create several years ago to open up a stronger jobs pipeline into the cultural community from CUNY's diverse pool of talent. The Cultural Corps is now accepting applications from students for the next term. These are paid opportunities for eligible CUNY students to gain hands-on experience at some of our city's amazing cultural groups. Places like the Laundromat Project in Brooklyn, Alice Austin House in Staten Island, the Bronx Council for the Arts on the Arts, New York City Ballet in Manhattan, the Queens County Farm Museum, and dozens more host Cultural Corps members each year. Students should apply by March 31st. The program is always looking for new cultural partners too. So again, anyone who wants to host one of the amazing students that come through this program should visit CUNY's website to learn more. Finally, our CDF team has moved mountains these last 2 years via Zoom, of course, to keep city funds flowing to cultural groups as they face some of the most difficult times we hope we'll ever see. While struggling through the same professional and personal upheavals we've all faced, our programs unit quickly implemented reforms to make accessing funds easier and more equitable for all grantees. These changes included streamlining applications and expanding eligibility for multi-year awards to all groups. Now we're preparing to embark on the next phase of these efforts for the fiscal year 23 Cultural Development Fund, bringing every eligible group back for a competitive panel review for the first time in 3 years. As part of this, we are also making reforms to the panel review process itself, notably expanding the number of panelists, increasing stipends, and making a dedicated effort to have panels of cultural community members who reflect our city's breadth and diversity. In short, we want to make sure that people reviewing applications and making funding recommendations bring a wide range of views, perspectives, and experiences to the table. We plan to open the panel nomination process in the coming weeks. We need your support to recruit people with deep roots in your districts to serve on panels and help us steward these public funds. Again, we believe there is no recovery for New York City without culture. From bringing tourist dollars back to our city, to the social and educational value the arts bring to every New Yorker, the power of the arts to heal and inspire is unrivaled. As I said earlier in the testimony, the new energy and enthusiasm on the City Council is incredibly exciting as we continue the difficult work of supporting our cultural recovery while making sure city funds reach those who need it most. We look forward to working toward a city budget with you while investing in these priorities and also finding ways to work smarter and more efficiently. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
And Chair, will go to you next. Just a reminder, after Chair questions, we'll go to Council member questions. Please use the Zoom raise hand function and we'll call on Council members in the order that they raise their hand. Thank you. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Feinberg. It's nice to see you again. The first question I have is, in the fiscal year 2023 preliminary budget for DCLA, it stands at $145.5 million, and this is an $8.6 million decrease from fiscal year 2022. 99.8% of funding for the DCLA is city funding. How will this decrease impact the agency, and what programs and operations are being affected by this decrease?
So, right, thank you for the question, Chair. So where we are right now in the budget process is pretty much where we've been in the past year. This year, fiscal year 22 preliminary budget was $143.6 million, and now we're looking at $145.2 million, again, for the preliminary budget. A lot of our budget does come in adoption, and so that's you're talking about the decrease, but I think that's really relative to what happens at budget adoption. So I don't anticipate any additional programs being cut until we know more through this budget process of the full picture of our numbers.
Okay, thank you. And at the urging of the council, the administration added approximately $30 million at adoption of the fiscal 2022 plan. What was this funding used for in fiscal year 2022?
Yeah, we use that money as we all have been living through COVID. In 2020, we used it more for COVID relief. And then last year, because COVID did not go away as fast as any of us hoped it would, we used it more for recovery. So we used that additional $30 million to supplement the funding that was already in place to both the CIGs and to the CDF groups to ensure that they could continue to provide vital programming to their communities.
And just as a follow-up, how many more cultural organizations compared to fiscal year 2021 were funded through the CDF because of this one-time funding?
I'll have to get back to you with the exact number. But again, the way that we were able to do it and what we tried to do before was to make it easier so that they could have just a renewal process versus a new application process, because we respected and understood that a lot of the groups, in some cases, had furloughs, were understaffed, so they didn't have the time to put together a new proposal. So instead, we said, let's just try to renew them so that they can ensure continuity of funding.
Yeah. Thank you. And no worries if you don't have this off the top of your head, but how has this one-time funding been helpful to DCLA in its operations, programming, and initiatives such as supporting SIGs and bringing in more funds for the CDF?
We appreciate the additional funding that we're able to provide the field. It's one time this year, to back up for a minute, last year was a historically high budget for DCLA. This past year, I think it was $230 million. It was a historically high budget. It was done in partnership with the council. Part of that budget increase also, I would be remiss if I didn't include that also includes some federal stimulus funding. So that's why we were able to bump it up so much.
Right. And why is the $30 million that were added at adoption of the fiscal 2022 plan by the administration not included in the fiscal 2023 preliminary budget?
I think it's an ongoing conversation. This is an early part of that budget process. We're having ongoing conversations with OMB and with City Hall. So that's where we are right now in this process.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And I want to move on to head count of DCLA. The fiscal 2023 preliminary plan includes a reduction of over $157,000 in fiscal 2022 to 2026 through elimination of vacancies in the agency. Does the agency believe it has an adequate number of staff to efficiently run all the programs and initiatives?
You know, we can always do more with more.
Right.
But we feel that we have a structure in place and staffing in place to continue to provide the services that we do as an agency.
And due to COVID, as you know, more cultural organizations need support, and most organizations rely on DCLA grants for their programming and operations. Over the years, there has been a rise of CDF applications, and with COVID recovery, it is expected that more organizations will seek out this funding. Does DCLA have enough staff to handle the budget allocations, especially as we enter into a new budget cycle?
No, again, I'm going to thank you for the question, and it's right on. You know, we do expect a lot of submissions this year as we do come back to panel for the first time in 3 years. We are working diligently with OMB and with City Hall and DCAS to fill the current vacancies that we have so that we can be fully staffed up to run a robust panel review process this year.
Right. And just a final question when it comes to headcount of the agency. How will DCLA ensure that with their current staffing situation that the CDF application review process will be done in an equitable way?
We will just, again, we will work with the current staff that we have, and any staff that come on board, we will be sure to inform them the way that we as an agency are committed to equitable funding, and so that they are aware of that. And again, I would go back to the panel review process, and I also would go back to in my testimony, the call to you and your colleagues to help us get more panelists that come from all different neighborhoods throughout New York City. I don't think we could do this blind. We're not, we know who we know, more people. We are reaching out to you in good faith to ask for your help.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. And I just want to cover a final base before moving on to some of my colleagues who may have questions. I wanted to ask, how many active capital projects does the agency currently have? And how many cultural organizations are these at?
There are a total of 425 capital projects right now, which includes a total of 213 organizations.
Okay. And what is the breakdown of DCLA's capital projects by borough? Does DCLA track its projects this way? How can we ensure more capital work is done in the outer boroughs?
We do keep track of our capital projects by borough, and I can follow up with you later if you want more information, but I can tell you that in the Bronx, there are 31 projects. In Brooklyn, there are 94.
Mm-hmm.
In Manhattan, there are 219. In Queens, there are 48. Staten Island, there are 26. And then there are 7 that are citywide.
Mm-hmm. And I do have to ask, as a follow-up, of course.
Yes, of course.
Does DCLA work to ensure its capital spending is spread across the city in an equitable way?
Yes, absolutely, we do. And I want to go back to the capital process that we use, which is that it's a request-driven process.
Okay.
Cultural organizations come to us. At the same time, we do webinars and technical assistance for groups that are interested in becoming an applicant for a capital project. So we work with them, and we also work with you on the council, and we also work with borough presidents as well to ensure that there is a greater equity among the groups that are applying, and also making sure that they are able to complete their application in a timely fashion so that they too can receive the capital funding.
All right. Well, I have one more question for you before I kick it back to Brenda. How much community perspective factors into capital planning and decision-making?
I'm sorry, Chair, could you repeat that question?
How much community perspective goes into and factors into capital planning and decision-making?
No, I think I would say that really, that's really the behest of the cultural organization that's applying, to the extent that they're hearing from their community that they need, for example, new lighting, or they want to build out a new theater within their space. You know, that's something that I think they are speaking to as part of their application process.
Mhm. Well, those are all the questions that I have for you, Deputy Commissioner. I'll pass it on to you again, Brenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Osei.
Thank you so much, Chair. So at this point, we will move to council member questions. Excuse me. If any council members have questions for the administration and DCLA, please use the Zoom raise hand function and you will be added to the queue. As a reminder, please keep your questions to 5 minutes, including answers, and wait for the sergeant at arms to tell you when your time begins. The sergeant will then let you know when your time is up. And our unmuter will unmute you. At this point, Chair, we do not have any council member questions. So we'll just wait one moment. If any council members have questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function. Okay, and council member Hanif has a question.
Time starts now.
One sec. Hi, Sheila. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again, Councilmember.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to get into the questions because I have several. So I fully support boosting the tourism sector, but I want to make sure that concurrently our efforts around cultural affairs are focused on providing services and programming and services for local residents, especially those with lower incomes. Could you describe the department's efforts on this front?
So I just want to make sure I heard your question, and thank you for it, but I want to make sure I heard it accurately. Yes, we are committed to tourism. And one of the things that I think goes back to tourism is like actually at the height of the pandemic, we partnered with NYCC and Company and MOAM, some of our interagency partners, to do a local campaign to make sure that people in the local neighborhoods and all the neighborhoods in New York City were able to access cultural institutions in their neighborhood. So it was like hyper local. So that was part of our Tourism 101 from, I think it was the fall of 2020. You know, again, we are committed, as are you, to providing cultural programming and services to organizations that do that. We feel that culture, as I said in our testimony, is vital to the recovery of New York City. But I also think it's vital, if you will indulge me for a minute, I think it's really vital to the spirit of the individual that lives here. And it shouldn't be a one-off that you have an opportunity to go experience something on a Sunday or on a weekend. It should be something that's embedded throughout your experience living in New York City. So we are committed to that as well.
Thank you. Could you describe the delays in distribution of the Cultural Development Fund money to nonprofits and what the current status of distribution is?
Yeah, sure. I think during the, thank you for that question, Councilmember. Again, during the pandemic, as everyone else, we had to shift to remote work, and that did create a little bit of an issue, a little bit of a delay in getting payments out. We are back on track with getting payments out as fast as we can right now.
That's really good to know. And then what is the department doing to ensure that cultural organizations are paying wages that allow workers to live above the poverty line? Are there guidelines for organizational budgets in this regard? And if so, how are they enforced?
That's an issue that's come to our attention, that the cultural workforce is not paid as well as other sectors in the city. In terms of the actual, panel process, it's part of the actual process that we do for funding. We do look at organizational budgets, but we don't, I want to be clear, like we don't necessarily have a stance on that, but we are aware of that as an issue, and we do work with our partners in the cultural sector to make sure that that message gets amplified, that people do need to make a decent living wage. I'll also just add that, again, because we're aware of it, it's part of why we partner with CUNY and other places to ensure that people that start getting into the pipeline of a job in the cultural sector are able to secure a living wage.
Do you think there might be an opportunity for the agency to have a stance?
Perhaps down the road, it's something that we can explore.
And then finally, I've heard a lot about the city's big campaign to bring back Broadway. Can you describe what targeted efforts are underway for local artists that are focused on smaller scale performances and that have been particularly hit by the pandemic?
Again, well, one, I think I put it in the testimony, arts and, we have some of these different opportunities, arts and educators. We're working with the Arts and Education Roundtable. There are some $1,000 grants that are going out there. We are working with organizations, the local arts councils in particular, help with local artists and get funding as well. And we support the local arts councils.
Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, council member.
Thank you so much, council member. So at this point, we will go to council member Farias. And you are the last council member at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, no.
Just like last time. Thank you so much for everyone being here and for my colleagues' previous questioning. Really glad Councilmember Hanif started off with tourism. As Chair of Economic Development, I am constantly looking at it and trying to get some answers as we move through recovery here in the city. So just to touch base a little bit, and I just want it for the record, visitors to cultural institution groups fell in the last fiscal year when compared to prior years, as we know. Do we happen to know the estimate for FY22?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember. I do not have a record of visitors for fiscal year 22, but can I just go back for 1 second? I just,
sure.
I would be remiss if I did not do a broad-based shout out to all the cultural organizations in New York City who really, to your point, are the backbone to the recovery of the city. They pivoted in ways that I don't think any of us could foresee or plan for, but they did it. They became vaccination sites, they became polling sites, they became food pantries, they became cultural connections when we needed them the most. And so I just wanted to give that shout out to all the culturals in New York City.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that shout out. I'm going to reiterate that with you. We saw them being critical to really our recovery and our response during the pandemic. So, kudos to everyone out there. We appreciated that response during a really hard time our city was having. So don't worry about that number. I'm sure we can touch base another time. Great. And then the other ask I had was if we happen to know the portion of reduction in visitors that were local versus just tourists. Do we happen to have that data?
I don't have that data, but I'm happy to look into it and follow up with your office.
Great, thank you. And then just to switch gears with the citywide cultural plan, can you please provide us any additional updates on the agency that's implementing the cultural citywide plan?
I'm going to defer to our Chief of Staff, Shirley Levy, for that one.
Hi, Councilmember. Thank you very much for that question. The cultural plan was created in 2017. It's a 10-year plan that actually recruits the participation of not just DCLA, but a lot of our sister agencies. So as we go through another year and we look ahead, we really are looking to engage our partners in different city agencies and figure out together how we can support arts and culture, not just through our own budget and activities, but collectively as a city with everyone's help. So it's an ongoing multi-pronged process.
Great, thank you for that. And my colleagues asked additional questions that I already had. So thank you so much for your testimony today.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Okay. And Chair, with that, no other council members have raised their hands at this time. So we are ready to move to the public. If you have no other questions.
I do want to, acknowledge before we move on and thank Cultural Affairs, obviously. But before we hear from the public, I do want to share that this committee is also hearing two council resolutions pertaining to the conflict in Ukraine. And do any members of the committee have any questions about either resolution If not, we can move on to the public. Amazing. Back to you, Brenda. I feel like a news anchor.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you very much. The committee report for those resolutions are also on Legistar. Okay, so at this point, we are finished with the Cultural Affairs Administration testimony portion of the hearing, and we will move to public testimony. So I will, Chair, go to you to acknowledge there are no council members that have joined. I will move to that portion. And we'll just do some housekeeping matters to start. So all panelists will have 2 minutes to deliver your testimony. And we request that out of respect of other people who are waiting to speak, you please stay within your allotted time. If there's anyone who would like to submit written testimony for the record, you may do so by emailing testimony up to 72 hours after the hearing to testimony@council.nyc.gov. I will also now turn it over to go through, actually, I will continue to go through some other procedural items. Thank you. For those that were not here for the first portions of today's hearing, my name is Brenda McKinney. I am counsel to the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. As a panelist, as a reminder, you will be on mute until it is time for you to testify, at which time your name will be called and you will be unmuted by the Zoom host. If you mute yourself after you have been unmuted, you'll need to be unmuted again by the host. So please wait for the Sergeant of Arms to tell you when your time begins. Once you are unmuted, the Sergeant will then let you know when your time is up. As a reminder, you have 2 minutes and you actually have to accept the unmute button when you're unmuted. So we will now hear from panel number 1. I will name the first members of this panel based on who is present. One moment, please. So first, we will hear from Coco Killingsworth from Brooklyn Academy of Music, testifying on behalf of Cultural Institutions Group, or the SIG, followed by Laura Washington from the New York Historical Society, and followed by Sade Lithcott from National Black Theater. This is panel 1. So if you are ready, Ms. Killingsworth, you may begin your testimony.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chair Osei and members of the committee. I am Coco Killingsworth, co-interim president at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, or BAM, and vice chair of the Cultural Institutions Group. I'm here today to provide testimony on behalf of the CIGs, a diverse coalition of 34 cultural organizations who share a public-private partnership with the City of New York and are located in all 5 boroughs, including zoos, gardens, museums, and performing arts organizations. We are grateful for the council's vital support for culture and the arts in New York City, and are especially grateful to have this conversation in a moment where the city is looking beyond recovery. We know that our sector of culture and arts is critical to signaling to the world that the city's vibrancy is restored and fundamental for supporting communities as they heal and build a more equitable city. The CIGs have a distinct relationship with the city based in partnership, and we welcome the opportunity to work with the council to address New York's most pressing needs. Through this closeness with city government, in the last 2 years alone, CIGs have continued to deliver world-class cultural programming, provided virtual and in-person experiences, embraced open culture, held vaccination and COVID testing sites, hosted food pantries, and so much more. CIGs annually employ over 12,000 people and over 8,265 additional volunteers from across the city. My time is going, so I'm going to move quickly. We are in partnership with you all, and BAM has been key in continuing to do work with our school children and seniors through the pandemic, both as a lifeline. One of the innovations and silver linings of the pandemic was how the cultural community came together, seen through our ongoing Culture at 3 calls happening right now. Last year, we had the most unified, inclusive, and equity-driven ask of the New York City cultural community has ever done, and we hope to build on that this year. We would like to see the FY22 PEG cut. We would like to see the FY22 PEG cut to the Cultural Development Fund restored. As the council determines its budget priorities for FY23, We are here to ask for the restoration of all the council's initiatives and restoration of $35 million of the FY2020 funding. We also request an additional $50 million for the cultural community. We look forward to being in dialogue with the council and the administration about that request in detail in the coming weeks. As a collective, the CIGs ask the council to commit to a comeback and beyond. New York will be an example to the world of a new type of city, one that values every citizen and invests in every community. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
All right, thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we will hear from Ms. Laura Washington.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chairman Osei and all members of the committee. My name is Laura Washington. I'm Chief Communications Officer and Vice President for Strategic Partnerships at the New York Historical Society. And on behalf of the institution, I want to thank you for your continued support of education and the arts in New York City, particularly during these challenging times. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify. Now, for more than 200 years, the New York Historical Society has told the history of our nation's founding. And since 2005, the Historical Society has really been a galvanizer in the museum world by boldly undertaking a series of landmark exhibitions that re-examine U.S. history from the perspectives of the historically disenfranchised. These include exhibitions like Slavery in New York, Chinese American Exclusion Inclusion, Black Citizenship in the Age of Jim Crow, and most recently, Dreaming Together. Now, in fiscal year 2020, the New York Historical Society partnered with the American LGBTQ+ Museum to bring forth plans to construct a major museum dedicated to LGBTQ+ history and culture. This new museum will be housed on the top floor of the New York Historical Society's planned expansion. The project will provide critical workforce development and job creation opportunities. It'll allow the Historical Society to help advance New York City's economic recovery in the wake of the pandemic while bolstering the arts and culture sector. The American LGBTQ+ Museum will partner with us to develop programming that brings the voices, perspectives, actions, and achievements of this population to the foreground. The new building will be a place where the institution will be a place where thousands of annual visitors, including tourists, school groups, and others can see themselves as part of the full American story. The building will hold additional classrooms and gallery spaces, which will allow us to expand the number of K-12 and higher education
Time expired.
served. We currently serve roughly 200,000 students and teachers, and the expansion is going to add new class space and access to our American LGBTQ, American Academy for American Democracy, which is a civics learning residency for all New York City sixth graders. And I mean, we know that sixth graders and everyone else during this time of political discord need to be informed. We also have a Masters of Arts in Museum Studies program, and we do in partnership with CUNY. And I want to thank you. We remain grateful for the programmatic and capital funds that New York City has allowed us. And I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much. And finally, the last person on this panel, we will hear from Shadi Lithcott.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chair Osei and esteemed committee members and colleagues. My name is Shadi Lithcott. I'm the CEO of the National Black Theater, chair of Coalitions of Theaters of Color, a coalition that represents the largest body of culturally specific theaters in all 5 boroughs, and the co-leader of Culture at 3. I have had the great privilege to be born and raised in this incredible city I love so much. Growing up in Harlem in the 80s wasn't easy. It was plagued by both a crack and AIDS epidemic, the proliferation of gun violence, failing education system, and chronic economic disinvestment. In essence, growing up, it could have felt like we were left for dead. But in Harlem, we knew a secret that the world forgot. We had soul. As the daughter of both artists and entrepreneurs, I watched the intersection of the two help resuscitate my community, bringing catalytic economic revitalization and community resources to Harlem's youth, senior, deaf, disabled, and homeless populations, with programs and productions whose outcomes help to decrease youth involvement in the criminal justice system and improve mental health and well-being in our neighborhood. And the truth is, arts and culture does that wherever it is. We are and have always been the heartbeat and the soul of New York City. It is because of arts and culture that New York City is singular in the pantheon of great global cities and the cultural capital of the world. But we do our city and our organizations a grave disservice when we myopically view our sector solely through the nonprofit lens. As arts and culture is a generative sector, we are a proven economic engine from small outer borough neighborhoods to the overall city GDP. We are job multipliers and workforce development pipelines. We are not nice to have. We are crucial and essential to New York City's success, vibrancy, and recovery. The creative economy contributes more than 13% to New York City's GDP, and yet we receive less than 0.25%, less than 0.25% in funding. So here is my ask. I will wrap it up because of time. As the cultural capital of the world, we'd like to discuss a roadmap to get culture funded at 1% of the city's budget. Here's where we start. First, we ask for full restoration of the PEG that was unnecessary and a harsh cut to FY22's budget to the CDF grantees, the smallest cultural organizations throughout the city. For FY23 budget, we are here to ask for the restoration of all cultural initiatives. We are asking that our baseline funding be held harmless. We're asking for the restoration of FY22's PEG of $5 million to our baseline. And as Coco has said, we are asking that the council and the city's administration work together to pass a sector-wide ask for a visionary investment in building back New York's economy of $85 million. I will submit the breakdown of that in my written testimony. I want to thank you all for this time. We are asking not for handouts. We're asking you, our friends in government, to break arts and culture out of siloed conversations that rob both us and this great city of the solutions we all deserve. We're asking you, our council members who have been our partners and our friends in government, to try your hand at being creative when it comes to investing in a safe, vibrant, and thriving city. We're asking you to see us for our contribution and not just our designation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is the end of our first panel. Just a reminder as well that we will submit, or you may submit, we will accept written testimony up to 72 hours after the hearing. So while there's a 2-minute clock, you can submit as much written testimony as you like, and you can submit additional written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. So I will go to
Can
Chair.
I chime in for a second? Just to respond to Ms. Lythkoff's testimony, these pegs, and just to hear, and you need to reiterate this throughout the entirety of this hearing, these pegs to culturals, or it's BS. You know, when you just heard your testimony, especially coming from Harlem in the 80s, and how culture was such a impactful element to aiding the youth in Harlem when there were so many other things that were going on, especially pertaining to public safety. And maybe some of you have heard me say this on, you know, Culture at 3 or even at the New York Historical Society. But, you know, the two words that we're hearing in this administration often is public safety. Public safety, public safety. And yes, while culturals are going to help us rebuild our economy, culturals are also going to be how we heal our communities, especially after these rough couple of years. So these pegs, again, are BS. We're all on the same page here, but I just wanted to throw that into the conversation once again. Back to you, Brenda.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Chair. If any council members or Chair, if you have any questions for this panel, we can move on to the next panel. Otherwise, okay, thank you so much. So I'm going to call the next panel of witnesses, and thank you so much for your testimony. The next panel will be Lisa Gold from the Asian American Arts Alliance, Melody Capote from CCC ADI, and Rosalind Barber from the Public Theater. Thank you so much. If you are ready, Ms. Gold, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee members and Chair Osei. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my testimony today. My name is Lisa Gold, and I am the Executive Director of the Asian American Arts Alliance, a 39-year-old Brooklyn-based service organization that works to ensure greater representation, equity, and opportunities for Asian American and Pacific Islander artists and arts organizations. We work with artists and arts administrators throughout the 5 boroughs and across artistic disciplines. So today, I would like to ask each of you to name your favorite AAPI musician, author, dancer, actor, or visual artist. And if you can't, I'd like to ask you to consider why not. And I would venture to say it's partly because our community's cultural contributions haven't been sufficiently valued, and that AAPI artists and arts organizations have been grossly underfunded for decades, resulting in a lack of visibility and opportunities for our artists. AAPI-led and serving organizations receive less than 4% of the Department of Cultural Affairs discretionary budget, and there are 0 AAPI-led CIGs. So despite comprising almost 18% of the New York City population and a growing force in the electorate, we receive significantly disproportionate amounts of funding, closer to 2%. And that gap isn't closed by the philanthropic or the private sector. A recent report by APIF showed that for every $100 awarded by foundations, only 20 cents was designated for AAPI communities. So we all know that the arts are critical to the city's economic recovery and our community's health and well-being. Art heals, it provides respite, it helps spread ideas and concepts that are emotionally, intellectually, and ideologically complex. And it helps people work through trauma and build resilience. And right now, after multiple attacks on the AAPI community, our constituents are feeling fearful and isolated. And a recent report released by NAPOF last week noted that nearly 75% of AAPI women reported experiencing racism or discrimination over the past 12 months. So the AAPI community and our cultural organizations need increased support. We and other POC organizations have been under-resourced and underfunded for too long. We need to have our voices heard and our stories told. So in that, we support the findings of Hugh Art's brown paper and call for a $100 million fund for POC arts and cultural entities, and ask that the City Council and Department of Cultural Affairs ensure that our city's funding is distributed truly equitably. Thank you all for your leadership and support of cultural and arts during what has been and continues to be a very challenging time for our city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next panelist will be Melody Capote from the Caribbean Cultural Center's African Diaspora Institute.
Starting time.
Ms. Capote, you might, oh, fabulous.
Mr. Chairman and members of City Council, my name is Melody Capote, Executive Director of the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, a 45-year-old arts and culture organization that uses artistic expressions to promote racial and social justice and uplift the contributions of the African diaspora. I'm also a founding member of the original Cultural Equity Group and the steering committee member of the Latinx Consortium of New York. I want you to imagine a sunflower. It is a particular favorite of Oshun, one of the deities of the Orisha sacred traditions of the Yoruba people. This sunflower, the goddess Oshun, and even the consecrated beads worn around my neck are all part of culture, in the same way that music, dance, poetry, and spirituality are. Consider that the culture is the brown core of the flower, and each petal is one of the elements of the culture which I just named. Council members, these are the things that were stolen from indigenous people and descendants of the African diaspora. My colleagues testifying today will tell you what culture means to the economy of New York, and they will propose a $10 million cultural equity fund for addressing the needs of organizations of color who are so underserved in the inequitable distribution of cultural-related funds by this city. I support this request 100%. Whether as a program of DCA or an executive budget line. Therefore, I'm not going to spend a lot of time examining the what of the racism that has taken culture away from our community. Rather, I am here to tell you why you must do something extraordinary to make up for the cultural losses suffered by communities of color. These losses are real and they are also personal. Imagine me as a young woman applying to be a part of a dance program at a local university and being told that I didn't fit the image. And what was that image? It was that of a Eurocentric blonde who didn't have my curly hair, my full lips, nor my even fuller hips. Imagine being made to feel that these traits are bad with phrases like pelo malo, which when translated means bad hair, being referenced to my natural curls. I come here to tell you that there are hundreds of thousands of girls and boys who have suffered these and even uglier cultural losses caused by people basking in white privilege. Now listen closely to why you must do the right thing and support the Cultural Equity Fund in the amount of $100 million. You have all heard of restorative justice. It refers to a process where guilty parties attempt to make amends for the damage caused by their behavior. I am urging you to adopt a new phrase called reparative justice and provide funding that will allow organizations of color to build institutional capacity so that we can effectively compete with those who are privileged heirs of a millennium of enslavement, colonization, and other forms of oppression. Please give us back the culture that was stolen from us, not through tokenism and street naming changes. We need real dollars put into a fund that solidify the work of organizations of color that will ultimately help young people learn where they came from and thereby to become even better citizens of this country. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll have one more panelist on this panel, Rosalind Barber from the Public Theater.
Starting time.
Hi, my name is Rosalind Barber, Administrative Chief of Staff of the Public Theater. Thank you to Chair Ose and the members of the committee for calling today's hearing. The Public is a proud member of the Cultural Institutions Group, a diverse coalition of 34 cultural organizations across the 5 boroughs with a distinct public-private partnership with the City of New York. Over the past 2 years, the work of the Public has been transformed by the COVID-19 pandemic, a force that remains a profound threat to the very core of our field. From our assumptions around how we create and disseminate art to the financial toll facing individuals and institutions around the world. And yet, despite these challenges, the Public has continued to make its work available to the people of the City of New York through free and low-cost programming. In crafting our 2021-2022 season, the Public was faced with a new challenge. How do we grapple with returning to the stage in the wake of an international pandemic? In response, we've crafted a slate of programming which honors the stories we had planned to tell in 2019 and dreams forward to new partnerships that reflect the tectonic shifts our society has experienced between 2019 and 2021. This includes our fall productions of Kaludwada and our upcoming production of Seth's, a new musical which brings to life a complicated chapter in the ongoing battle for the right to vote, the American women's suffrage movement. This year, the Public is also investing in new partnerships to provide resources and physical space to exceptional BIPOC-led organizations heavily affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. In individual collaborations with NATCO and the Mayi Theater Company, the Public is committed to taking on the cost of producing the NATCO production of Out of Time and Lloyd's Chinese Lady at our downtown home. We're also continuing our decades-long relationship with the National Black Theater, and hi to Sade, and thank you for your testimony earlier, in a production of the New York premiere of James E. James's Fat Ham. The Public is delighted to be opening our doors to such exceptional organizations, making their visionary works available to our audiences.
I'm
In creating
inspired.
a long-term model with the BIPOC-led resident theater companies, we hope to continue leveraging our resources and influence for the benefit of organizations who speak to marginalized communities. And I just want to echo Melody and Sade and everyone else's call for the restoration of the funds from FY22 and the elimination of the PED cut to ensure that we have equitable funding for CDF and CIG organizations that have been so tremendously affected by the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, this is the final member of this panel.
It's all good. I don't think I have any questions to, seems as if Councilmember Hanif does.
Councilmember?
Starting
Thank you
time.
so much. Thank you for your testimonies to all the panelists. Lisa, thank you especially for your incredibly powerful testimony and being a force in this work and in this moment in the wake of violent anti-Asian violence. I guess I just want to use my time for us to hear more from you, so that my colleagues and I better understand what API cultural workers and artists are experiencing at this time. Please expand on the challenges, the joys, and how we can make sure API artists are not invisible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Councilmember Hanif. I'll tell you, it is a very difficult and challenging time. I have heard from my constituents, a dancer who runs her own dance company, who was followed on her bicycle and screamed at on the street. I've had artists dancers that were attacked on their way to performances. We've heard of people that are just afraid, frankly, to leave their house. Not even to mention, the toll that it's taken on organizations that have lost revenue due to, no income from performances or paid revenue opportunities. So, it's what we've been calling the dual pandemic of anti-Asian racism plus the losses due to the pandemic. So right now, one of the most important things that we can do is provide opportunities, visibility, support, and funding to the Asian American communities. We are working on a partnership right now with Mokata to build bridges and solidarity across our communities. So I think funding more work like that to help build a culture of understanding and communication is really critical. Obviously, mental health care and safety, we're also working on a number of programs that promote the mental health and safety of our constituents. So again, looking at all of these issues as not isolation, like culture doesn't exist in a vacuum, mental health doesn't exist in a vacuum. These are all interrelated. So we need to think of these holistically. So I want to thank you for your concern and hope that the rest of the council, again, considers the value and the input of Asian Americans, not just during APA Heritage Month and not just during Lunar New Year, but every single day of the year.
Thank you so much. Councilmember, did you have any other questions, or does anybody have questions for the panel? Okay, great. With that, Chair, we'll move to the next panel. I'll call out the three panelists on this panel, and then we'll take questions afterwards. So the next panel will be, and thank you to our panelists. The next panelist, will be, and apologies for any pronunciation in advance, Elizabeth Kashur from the new 42nd Street Theater, John Heislop from Local 1321 DC 37 or Queens Public Library Workers, and Lauren Bradley from Urban Librarians Unite. So the next witness will be Elizabeth Kashur. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Starting time.
Hello. The new 42nd Street appreciates the opportunity to submit this testimony in support of funding from the Committee for Cultural Affairs for the performing arts and arts education. The New Victory Theater is the premier nonprofit New York City theater for kids and families located in the hearts of Times Square with an annual audience of approximately 100,000 people. It is one of New York City's largest providers of live performing arts and classroom arts education programming, reaching 40,000 students in all grades annually. Through our own research on the intrinsic impacts of the performing arts on children, New 42 knows young people who have access to the arts receive myriad benefits that help them become more collaborative with their peers, as well as empathetic and understanding of the lives of others. Crucially important in a city where thousands of children live in underserved neighborhoods, the arts also inspire children to imagine a more optimistic future for themselves. New 42 believes access to the performing arts is an essential right for all. In immediate response to the closure of the New Victory Theater in March 2020, the organization launched a weekly digital program, New Victory Arts Break, in order to continue bringing the performing arts into the homes and lives of children. The interactive program takes kids on guided video explorations of an art form such as puppetry, percussion, and songwriting, and gives kids the tools they need to create and flex their own creative muscles. ArtsBreak has been a huge success, garnering nearly 1 million video views, and it is an important program we'll be sharing with classroom teachers as we move forward. Liz Walter, a teacher at Lexington School for the Deaf, told us, every Monday, we are in a race to share the new ArtsBreak materials with the school. I have definitely enjoyed every one that's caught my eye, and they are so inspiring. The response has been strong, so we'll continue to build as we move forward. In November 2021, the New Victory reopened, as did so many other theaters and other cultural organizations across the city. This year, we'll offer 6 presentations on our stage, and next year will be up to 10. So again, like so many others, we have come back strong. Recently, a parent at a performance at the New Victory shared that he attended with his 2 children and wrote a beautiful thank you note. This was the first public artistic piece we've seen in nearly 2 years. And my God, what a glorious, glorious piece it is. What a show, what a show, what a show. We're so happy to be back live for New Yorkers of all ages who need the rejuvenating spirit of the theater. We fervently believe that New 42 is an important part of the city's pandemic recovery, and that it is expanding access to all children will help us move forward to a more equitable and just society. With the City Council's help and continued funding for arts initiatives, we will bring the performing arts into an ever-expanding number of homes, classrooms, and schools across the city, and we will bring New Yorkers, even the youngest among us all, into the New Victory Theater for live performances that inspire, challenge, and bring hope and joy to all New Yorkers. Thank you for inviting us to testify.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The next witness will be Mr. Heislop from DC 37.
Starting time.
Chairman, Chi Osei, and fellow committee members, thank you for giving my fellow presidents, Leonard Paul of Local 374, Ronaldo Barbara of Local 1482, Deborah Allman of Local 1930, and I an opportunity to testify. These past 2 years have been very dramatic, chaotic, and tragic. Fortunately for our city, our public libraries were a beacon of stability and security. In each and every neighborhood, library staff, both frontline and back office, provided library services in buildings that were safe, comfortable, and clean. Our dynamic staff provided enhanced and innovative and novel library services that included grab-and-go library materials. Telephone and in-person reference services were provided along with remote printing. We provided virtual programs that included book clubs, workshops, trivia, cultural dance presentation, and much more. Additionally, creative tabling and outreach events were held as a point of contact with our customers. Buildings were converted to testing and vaccine sites. These vital and free services provided everyone a sense of community, especially important for those who suffered most during the pandemic. Mayor Adams' preliminary budget indicates a funding level that will barely allow the library staff to maintain our current level of service, and that will strain us next year. As this pandemic recedes, hopefully to a less severe, less tragic endemic disease, library users will flock back to their branches, demanding more of everything we offer, and we barely have enough staff now. This is where the City Council can help. We need your financial support so that we can meet this pent-up and expected demand. Children's programs are restarting, and we do not have enough children's librarians to meet the demand. Senior citizens who are cut off from their social networks are getting more comfortable being out in the public and need materials, a safe and clean place to congregate, and programming, and we do not have enough staff to meet their needs. Multiple branches do not have custodians, so custodians are required to cover multiple branches in one day. We have more software and hardware offerings that are creating a need for more staff with specialized skills. We have more immigrant and adult learners that will require teachers. Our customers will be demanding so much more from us, and with your financial support, we can meet this demand. These past 2 years, library staff proved that we are agile and adapt. As we return to some form of normalcy, library users will be expecting quality library services. The mayor's preliminary budget is a start, but is not enough. We are overwhelmed right now and will be more overwhelmed very soon. With your financial support, we can fulfill all of our customers and your constituents' demands for library services. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The final panelist will be on this panel, Ms. Lauren Bradley. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Starting time.
Thank you, committee members, and thank you, Chair Osei. My name is Lauren Bradley, and I'm here on behalf of the Board of Directors for Urban Librarians Unite. Our members are frontline library workers, library school students, and library lovers. To address Councilmember Hanif's earlier question about community outreach, frontline branch staff are the ones who do that, and we are experts at it. We support our patrons who are experiencing a range of issues, including houselessness, eviction, opioid addiction, food insecurity, learning barriers, and structural oppression. Our members are also involved in community efforts like mutual aid networks, food pantries, harm reduction programs, and open streets. One of many things our group does is organize the annual Urban Librarians Conference. Last September, our theme was Liberation and Joy. We heard from public library workers across New York City working on amazing projects, and I would like to share just a few of these. A group of children's librarians are actively dismantling racism in storytime songs through peer education. Prison Library Support Network is a grassroots collective of librarians who partner with all 3 library systems to provide outreach to people currently incarcerated. There is a staff-led initiative called Transform, which trains library staff to better serve transgender and nonconforming patrons. This is just a small sample of staff-driven projects across our public libraries, but it's illustrative of how frontline branch staff serve their communities. Because of this work, our branches and their staffing play a key role in reimagining New York as a more equitable and just city. Now is the time to invest in our libraries so our library workers can expand this vital work. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. That concludes this panel. If there are any council member chair questions.
Sure. I just want to acknowledge my good friend and Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso, who is on this hearing.
And actually, and Chair, if we don't have any other council member questions, our next panel, we can go to the Brooklyn Borough President, the Honorable Antonio Reynoso, as our next panelist, as our next witness. So the Brooklyn Borough President, if we don't have any questions, I'm just watching hands. I'm not seeing any. The next witness will be the Brooklyn Borough President. Thank you.
All right. All right. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here in my first hearing as a borough president to the city council, and of course, is with our good friend and Brooklyn City Council member, Chair Chiosei. Thank you so much, Chair, for having me. I'll be very quick. I know this is going to be a long hearing, so I'll take it away. Good afternoon, and thank you to the City Council, and again, Chair Chiosei, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I am Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso, and I am here to ask the mayor and the council to support the cultural institutions that serve a vital role in our communities, and ask that you consider equity in these funding allocations. Though all the city cultural institutions provide critical arts, cultural and historical education and programming, not all these cultural institutions are created equally. The pandemic hasn't been easy on any institution, yet the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan has a $3.3 billion endowment. And even as the pandemic raged, has $50 million set aside to purchase art. Meanwhile, Weeksville Heritage Center in Brooklyn, which celebrates one of the largest free Black communities in pre-Civil War America, is struggling just to keep its doors open. Now, Weeksville is part of the Cultural Institutions Group, or CIGs, along with 5 other amazing cultural institutions in Brooklyn: the Brooklyn Museum, Brooklyn Academy of Music, Brooklyn Botanic Garden, Brooklyn Children's Museum, and the New York Aquarium. Of these, the Brooklyn Museum has the largest endowment, which even before the pandemic was only about 5% of the Mets. Today, I ask that the council work with the mayor to restore all proposed cuts to the CIGs and the DCLA, develop a methodology for allocating these funds equitably that considers not only organization size, but also population served. I also want to call your attention to a recent report from Hugh Arts NYC, which researched the impacts and needs of arts organizations in New York City led by people of color. In contrast to these larger CIGs, these small organizations tend to have less stable funding sources and often rely on DCLA's Cultural Development Fund. Hugh Arts also found that these small people of color run organizations often provide much more than just arts programming in communities of color. For example, Many have pivoted to community service during the pandemic. Additionally, these organizations often lack stable space, face chronic underinvestment, and are less able to call upon individual donors to support due to the lack of disposable income in communities of color. Meanwhile, there is a lack of transparency in the allocation of CDF funding and no clear priority placed on addressing these disparities. Even with the supposed one-time supplemental funding allocation made last year, DCLA's budget still represents less than 1% of the city's total budget. And yet, now cuts are being proposed, cuts our communities simply can't afford. So I am calling on the mayor to not only restore the proposed cuts and add new funding to our cultural institutions, but also to implement new systems to ensure the arts and cultural funding is allocated equitably with transparency. The city doesn't need to give an organization with $3.3 billion endowment and billionaires on its board more money. It does need to lift up organizations that share the history of communities of color, educate Black and Brown youth, and serve as community anchors in underinvested neighborhoods. Thank you, and I look forward to working alongside DCLA, Mayor Adams, and of course, Chi Osei. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the Honorable Reynoso, the Brooklyn Borough President. Chair, if you or the council or any other council members have questions. Okay, this concludes this panel, and thank you so much again for your testimony. Welcome back. At this point, we will move to our next panel, panel 5. The next 4 individuals will be witnesses on this panel, and then we'll take questions at the end. As a reminder, again, you can always submit testimony up to 72 hours after the hearing. The next panelist will be Tracy Greenidge from Lucy Sexton from New Yorkers for Culture and the Arts, Alejandra Duque Chifuentes from Dance NYC, and Yayun Tang from New York Foundation for the Arts. Apologies again for any pronunciation. And if you are ready, Ms. Greenidge, you can testify. Thank you.
Time starts now.
We can see, I'm so sorry, we can't hear you. There might be a box that pops up to accept the unmute.
Yes.
You should be unmuted. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tracy Greenidge. I am the Director of Development at Cool Culture. And this testimony is on the behalf of my organization and the thousands of New York City families who receive our free programs annually. Cool Culture is a social justice organization that uses arts and culture to strengthen family and community well-being. We have nearly 20 years of BIPOC leadership and have been offering more than 50,000 families with free cultural access. Our work now goes much deeper, using targeted programs that encourage families to feel comfortable in cultural spaces and ensuring educators have the tools to help introduce arts into their parent and caregiver engagement initiatives, while allowing these same families to use their voices or have their voices amplified through the arts. I would like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for its longstanding support of Cool Culture and the hundreds of small BIPOC organizations who have operated far too long on a shoestring budget. Without your support, though, so many parents with young children, including myself, would not be able to freely access the arts in this wonderful city. I applaud the new incoming members for your commitment to continued commitment in this field. As I know that as the city fights to recover from the impacts of COVID and now mitigate the unfolding crises in Europe, we are aware of the difficult road that lies ahead, including the 3% impending budget cuts across the board for all city organizations. I stand with other cultural institutions to say that any cut to the already meager CDF budget would have deep ramifications for the arts, but particularly for those small organizations where staff is the only asset. We strongly urge you to ensure that all small BIPOC organizations continue to receive a level of support. And in fact, we support any increase so that we can continue to develop the relationships with our communities that have grown to rely on our cultural resources that would be otherwise unattainable. Continued support An increased level of funding is the only way forward and will enable Cool Culture and other organizations to continue to offer critical programs to BIPOC community members. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The next witness will be Lucy Sexton from New Yorkers for Culture and the Arts.
I start now.
Thank you, Chair Osei and members of the City Council for hearing this testimony. We are here today to ask that you invest in the citizens of every neighborhood of New York City. By investing in culture and arts for every New Yorker, we can build a vibrant, safe, healthy, and equitable city. You're hearing today from many artists and cultural groups detailing the extraordinary cultural work they're doing across our city. You already know that culture is key to citywide recovery, to its long-term economic stability. Culture is key to tourism. It is the #1 tourist attraction. It is the key to local neighborhoods, serving to increase foot traffic and bring dollars to local restaurants and businesses. Today, I want to talk about what culture brings to every aspect of the lives of your constituents, and to call for an equitable investment in culture for every community so that every ciitizen can experience the benefits of a robust cultural life in their neighborhood. This country has a history of neglecting and disinvesting in communities of color. This city's history is the same. We must consciously and deliberately ensure that dollars are going to Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and deaf and disabled communities and cultural organizations. By investing in BIPOC-led and serving cultural groups, by investing in culture for New Yorkers with disabilities, by sending tourism dollars to those local cultural centers, we will build a more equitable city. Every neighborhood should enjoy the data-proven benefits of a strong cultural ecosystem, which include improved outcomes in everything from education and aging to public safety and mental health. I ask that you speak to your colleagues in other committees, education, mental health, aging, criminal justice, and finance, and explain to them that culture and arts are part of the solution in every one of those areas. I join my colleagues in calling that the FY22 PEG cut to the CDF be restored. Cuts to DCLA staff are an equity issue. If the agency can't function efficiently, funds are delayed, most impacting smaller and often BIPOC organizations that can least afford to wait for reimbursement. As the City Council determines its budget priorities for FY20, we are here to ask for a restoration of all City Council initiatives, Coalition of Theaters of Color, Immigrant Arts Initiative, CASA and SUCASA, and more, and a restoration of the $35 million of FY22 funding. We'll be requesting an additional $50 million for the cultural community from the council and the administration, and are happy to follow up with more details. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Just one moment. Apologies. Okay, and the next witness will be Alejandra Duque Chifuentes. You may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. My name is Alejandra Duque Cifuentes, Executive Director of Dance NYC, the service organization of the dance industry and workforce in New York City. I'm coming to you today advocating for dance workers, organizations, and businesses that live within the larger performing arts creative economy. Arts workers and businesses are parents, they are educators, they are small business owners, they are therapists, they run large institutions and drive musicals on Broadway. I want to encourage you to imagine if you were to remove every dancing body from a stage on Broadway, what would happen to the many millions of dollar generating shows of our city? When the pandemic hit, it was the smallest organizations and the independent workers that were hit the hardest and have been unable to recover the most. Of those, our data found that immigrant, BIPOC, disabled workers, and specifically parents were the hardest hit in losses of income. We are telling our community by not paying them living wages, by not sustainably funding organizations with general operations, and by reducing the budget of arts and culture, we are saying that it's not possible for New Yorkers to make a living in the arts, and that the arts are not as viable as they actually financially are in our city. Despite being one of the least funded of the performing arts sector, the dance economy, the dance industry generates over $300 million to the economy of the city. This budget is not a financial document. It is a document where you articulate the values of this administration and the values of this city council. And what you decide to allocate will be a reflection of who are the workers of the city who we value. As Sade mentioned, we generate such a high percentage of the GDP of this particular city, and yet the investment is not proportional. And so I join my colleagues in requesting an investment that is proportional to the impact that we generate in the city, to the BIPOC workers and disabled and immigrant workers and businesses and industries that are so deeply impacted, and to ensure that the money that we are giving is materially creating an impact for folks that have systemically not had access to resources, intentionally been removed from having access to resources. We have to make decisions now to ensure that those workers and organizations can survive and continue to thrive in our city. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And now we will call the final person on this panel, whom is Ya-Yun Tang. Thank you.
Time starts.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Ya-Yun Tang. I'm the Program Officer, Immigrant Artist Resource Center at the New York Foundation for the Arts, also known as NYFA. We are an arts service organization whose mission is to provide financial, educational, and professional services to individual artists and emerging arts organizations. Our work impacts real human beings, and it is critical to our communities in New York City. Last year, NYFA was a lead partner launching the City Artist Corp grants to support New York City-based working artists who were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. NYFA distributed $15 million to 3,000 working artists across the city's 5 boroughs, helping the artists sustain their practices and engage the public throughout the New York City. In addition to administering grants, NYFA provides for professional development training to artists and has been serving 10,000 immigrant artists since 2007. This year, we're expanding NYFA's Immigrant Artist Resource Center to provide more support to immigrant artists who play a crucial role in healing our communities and are the backbone of New York City's creative economy. We know that the livelihoods of immigrant artists are facing major threats because many immigrant-led and immigrant-serving arts organizations report big loss of their annual budgets. NYFA feels that we need to make efforts to reach and serve those that we are not reaching yet and further uplifting their perspectives. In order for us to continue our work, we need funding now more than ever to support artists and to sustain our own operations. This is also very personal to me as I'm an immigrant from Taiwan and have been working in New York City's arts sector for more than 10 years. We recognize the City Council is facing very difficult budget decisions, but the funding we receive through the New York City Cultural Affairs is critical to our survival. We ask you to keep in mind that artists and cultural workers are essential. They heal our communities, and we know that neighborhoods with crucial cultural assets show better outcomes for education, aging, crime, health, and community well-being, as many of my colleagues have been talked about. So we ask that the fiscal year 22 PEC cut to the Cultural Development Fund to be restored. And for fiscal year 23, we asked for a restoration for all cultural council initiatives and the restoration of $35 million of fiscal year 22 funding to DCLA. Thank you very much. We know we have a difficult job ahead. Special thank you to our council member in Dumbo, New York, Lincoln Ressler, for supporting the immigrant artist community that we serve. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for your testimony and to all the members of this panel. This testimony concludes this panel. Are there any council member questions? Or Chair, do you have any questions? Okay. I don't see any hands, so we will move to the next panel. Thank you again. One moment. So I will call the names of everyone on the panel and then call you individually. The next panel will be Risa Shoup from the Alliance of Resident Theaters of New York, Francine Garber-Cohen from the Regina Opera Company, and Aya Esther Hayashi from the People's Theater Project. So the next witness is Risa Shoup. You may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Osei, esteemed committee members, and other colleagues for your time. The Alliance of Resident Theaters New York is a nearly 50-year-old member service organization that represents over 400 nonprofit theaters throughout New York City. We are a grant maker providing the field with $2 million in funding every year, primarily to theaters with budgets under $500,000, who consistently seed the field with new talent and techniques, and often come from communities that are most underserved by philanthropy. We offer subsidized rehearsal, office, and theater space in 3 facilities throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn, all of which are fully accessible to folks with disabilities. We offer trainings like sexual harassment prevention training tailored specifically for our industry, and disability justice seminars. Our members may have closed their venues during the pandemic, but they never stopped working. Let me tell you, you cannot stop theater makers. We obsessively pursue telling our stories out of a deep desire for connection and collaboration. Educational programming and theatrical presentations pivoted to virtual production within days of the March 2020 shutdown. And with many theaters now reopen, we are seeing a resurgence of new and previously scheduled productions in theaters around the city, written, directed, and performed by production teams as diverse as the city's population. As an industry, we exhibited exemplary compliance with the Key to NYC mandate at tremendous cost to our bottom lines because we agreed it would keep our artists and our audiences safe. Theaters are businesses, and our workers are actors and ticket sellers, parents and teachers, renters and homeowners. Our audiences buy a ticket and go out to eat at a restaurant and then take the subway to see one of our shows, supporting other workers across other sectors. We are asking to see the FY22 program to eliminate the gap cut to the Cultural Development Fund restored as we find a way through the endemic phase of the pandemic and continued constraints on earned income and the end of relief funding. Additionally, I am asking for a restoration of all council initiatives and a restoration of the $35 million of FY22 funding, which for my member theaters and I will provide critical resources we need to rebound during this endemic phase of the pandemic. I am also asking for more equitable funding practices and more funding overall, as has been eloquently demanded by my colleagues Sade Lithcott, Alejandra Duque Cifuentes, and others, to support theaters and other cultural institutions that are led by and serve communities of color. These institutions are at the forefront of artistic and administrative practice, but their access to funding lags far behind their creativity and innovation. Thank you for listening to us and for your leadership and support. If any of you would like to tour one of our facilities or tour one of our member theaters located in your district, I welcome you to reach out to me. We would love to see you at the theater.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Our next panelist will be Francine Garber-Cohen from the Regina Opera Company.
Time starts now.
Hi, I'm Fran Garber-Cohen, president of Regina Opera, a small budget organization. For 52 years, Regina Opera, based in Sunset Park, an underserved and low-income BIPOC community, has offered fully staged operas with full orchestra and many free concerts in parks, libraries, and festivals, mostly in Sunset Park. We provide affordable entertainment in accessible venues for audience members who may not otherwise attend live performances. The performances bring happiness and empathy to our audiences and bring people together, especially senior citizens who make up about 65% of our audience. The need for cultural enrichment is reflected in the fact that over 4,000 people usually attend our live performances each season, and we have had 40,000 views of our online opera programming, allowing people who have been avoiding public contact due to COVID to still enjoy music. Regina Opera and most other cultural organizations have suffered greatly during the past 2 years due to COVID. We need to return New York City to its prior strength as a cultural capital, and a slower recovery for arts and culture will extend the length of recovery for many industries that the creative economy affects. To accomplish this, we request that the PEG cut funding of 2022 be restored. As the council determines its budget priorities for fiscal year 23, we are here to ask for the support of all council initiatives and additional funding for New York City cultural community. In addition, I'd like to stress that the cultural equity is central to a thriving culture and city. Underserved and underfunded areas in New York City deserve an equitable share of the funding. This will help all of us, especially us in Sunset Park, to return to normal.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And just a reminder, you can submit written testimony as much as you'd like and up to 72 hours after the hearing. Our next panelist, we have one more on this panel, is Aya Esther Hayashi from the People's Theater Project. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Osei and committee members. Thank you for your advocacy and leadership on behalf of the arts and culture community and for communities of color as we approach the pandemic's second anniversary. My name is Aya Esther Hayashi. I'm the development director at People's Theater Project, also known as PTP. We're the largest performing arts organization in Manhattan, north of Harlem, and steering committee member of LXNY. At PTP, we create theater with and for immigrant communities to build a more just and equitable world. As an immigrant and Latina-led organization, our neighbors of all ages and backgrounds in Washington Heights, Inwood, and the Bronx trust and rely upon us. At PTP, theater is our tool in the work of social justice, amplifying and humanizing the stories of New York City immigrants. We do this through the work of the PTP Company, our multi-generational, multilingual ensemble of all immigrant artists of color. Through our 6-year PTP Academy for Leadership, Theater, and Activism, and our PTP partnerships with schools and CBOs, we serve over 1,000 immigrant youth and children every year. Free of charge to all families, our programs guide these young people through a journey of self-discovery and celebration of their cultures. The creative economy generates $110 billion in economic activity, a number that far outstrips what the city invests into our sector. Today, we join the demand for a designated $100 million fund for BIPOC arts and cultural entities, a mere 0.1% of the mayor's proposed budget. We also ask that you restore funding added at adoption last year. Without the latter, our sector will face, in essence, a $20 million cut, which will affect PTP and so many other small and mid-sized organizations in our city. Art heals. Immigrant stories are New York City's stories. Help us bring our city to a place of flourishing in the way that only arts organizations of color can. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you so much for your testimony. That concludes this panel. So if the chair or any council members have questions, if they don't, I do not see any hands, so we will move to the next panel. Thank you again. The next panel will be, I'll name everybody on the panel, all the panelists, and then we'll take questions at the end from council members or chair. Olympia Kazi, Adina Applebaum, Dennis Mathis, and apologies, Mark Ribbett will be in this next panel. So with that, Ms. Kazi, when the sergeant calls the clock, you may begin your testimony. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today. So my name is Olympia Kazi. I'm a founding member of the New York City Artists Coalition and the Music Workers Alliance. And for the last 4 years, I also served as the vice chair of the first ever Nightlife Advisory Board. You know, every time I come to these hearings, it breaks my heart. So about this year, what I want you to make sure that you don't forget are the workers that were extremely impacted and didn't qualify for a lot of the relief, especially music workers. They had to tour after the pandemic unemployment insurance expired, and they ended up losing more money and remaining stranded in other states and in other countries, and they lost more money. So I really hope you're going to have the New York City Artists Corps 2.0, and this time around we're going to get it right. And so the last year we helped some people, but we didn't focus on the impacted performing artists. So I want to make sure that this time around there is a New York City Artists Corps 2.0, and that it does prioritize impacted performing artists who were earning their living as artists before the pandemic, and we hope they will be able to continue now and after. The second thing I wanted this committee to consider is beyond DCLA, we should also be talking with the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. We should be looking at programs instead of having to give relief after. Let's institute a pandemic touring insurance fund, a pilot project that we can start and fund already this year. This way, artists don't have to accrue debt and then seek relief next year. Last but not least, I want to make sure that we're collecting some data. So DCLA and MOM had committed to do a music census before the pandemic, but they never come through. So if we can invest also in a little bit of data about our art workforce, that would be fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and welcome to the new chair.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The next witness will be Adina Applebaum. You may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Thank
you, Chair Ose. Thank you, committee members. My name is Adina Applebaum. I'm the development manager at the Center for Fiction, which is a home for storytelling that brings diverse communities together as readers and writers to share a passion for fiction. We're a 200-year-old organization. We recently relocated from Manhattan to Fort Greene in 2019. Through our programming, we spotlight local authors. We host events about cultural and social issues. One recent event we held with Ian Manuel and Yusuf Salam was about their experiences of incarceration and the role that literature played in helping them survive. In addition to public events, our programming includes emerging writer fellowships, which help talented writers publish debut novels, and adult writing workshops and reading groups. Today, I'm honored to tell you more about our programming for young readers, Kids Read, Kids Write. Our Kids Read, Kids Write programming annually serves students from New York City public schools in grades 3 through 12. Our collaborative programming connects young people with dynamic writers who share their backgrounds and experiences. And we work with teachers to figure out which writers and programming makes the most sense with their curriculum and will connect the most with their students. We provide students with free books, reading groups, and writing workshops with the goal of empowering them to tell their own stories. And a huge percentage of our students live in shelters. At one of our recent partner schools on Staten Island, the percentage of students living in shelters was 14% and live below the poverty line. So for them, books can unfortunately be an unaffordable luxury, and giving them books of their own to keep and read and talk about characters whose lives resemble them or characters from completely different worlds opens new possibilities and also reminds them that their stories are valued. And that is really at the heart of what we do. Teachers have told us that our programming draws out new voices and perspectives, and authors with whom we partner have called the experience extraordinary. And we do offer artists an honorarium for partnering with us, so we are supporting them financially as well. We believe that creating interest in telling stories for children has never been more important. And as with so many of our peers, we've suffered devastating losses from the COVID pandemic. So as we begin to reemerge, it's only with your support that we can assure a strong future for storytelling for readers of writers of all ages, and make sure that children have books and stories that both speak to and expand their experience. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The next panelist will be Devin Mathis. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Hello, thank you. My name is Devin Mathis. I'm the Executive Director of Urban Glass in Fort Greene, and I'm submitting testimony today on behalf of the new coalition of culturals in city-owned buildings. Our coalition consists of 13 organizations with operating budgets ranging from $500,000 to $16 million, and was formed 6 years ago under the common umbrella of culturals operating out of city-owned buildings who are not CIGs. With the help of Kathy Hughes and Councilmember Cumbo, we were able to successfully advocate with DCLA to provide us with energy subsidies that boost our operational capacity and thereby safeguard our delivery of diverse cultural programs. We also came together because we all have a collective obligation to our communities and the city properties which we operate and steward. We have made and continue to make long-term investments in these city properties. The energy subsidy has been an immense help for all of us and has enabled us to continue our important work. The subsidy really has been a lifeline, and with the change in both the commissioner, assistant commissioner, and cultural committee chair, we wanted to make sure that you knew about this important funding and its history. The new coalition of culturals and city-owned buildings cares after populations and neighborhoods historically underserved by larger cultural institutions. Together, we engage nearly 2 million New Yorkers. Many of us are able to distribute food, water, and PPE supplies to our neighbors and essential workers, and others within our coalition were able to open our lobbies to provide temporary cooling places and bathrooms for protesters and others in need. We are more than just art spaces. We are legacy organizations that have a commitment to the neighborhoods where we are located. We are anchor institutions, which are really important during times of disruptions and challenge. Our communities need us more than ever. For each of us, the energy subsidy is a significant part of our budget. I'm gonna skip ahead very quickly. For the communities we serve and the artists who create within our spaces, losing this funding, which would negatively impact our ability to stay open and continue functioning, is not just a problem, it's a crisis. We're asking you for your continued advocacy on the energy subsidy for the new coalition of culturals and city-owned buildings. The energy subsidy was a hard-won victory. If it's dropped from the budget, it's unlikely to return. Please keep the energy subsidy for the new coalition whole. Thank you again for your time and all you do to advocate for the arts.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We have one more person on this panel. Mark Ribbett, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock. Thank you.
Time starts now.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Rebo. I'm a musician, a touring indie musician, and I'm with the Music Workers Alliance, which is dedicated to the empowerment of indie musicians. And I would like to underline my support for everything that Olympia Kazi has said. We need, in terms of policy, to refund New York City artists, to refund the New York City Artist Corps, but we need to fix the problems that prevented that program from benefiting working musicians last time. There was no, it was open to any self-defined artist, whether they had ever worked or not as an artist, or whether they had in fact been impacted by COVID-19 or lost any work as a result, artwork as a result of it. Thus, actual working artists were marginalized in that process. Now, I also want to give a shout out to Sadeh Lithcroft's acknowledgement that a lot of our economy lies outside of the public and philanthropically funded sector. A lot of it is in the private sector, but I'd like to expand that. A lot of our, from the standpoint of working musicians, a lot of our economy is an export. We work outside our, we love to work at the publicly funded institutions when we get the gig, but we earn our living on tour outside of New York. As touring musicians, we've been triply impacted. We've been impacted by the shutdowns here and abroad. We've been impacted by the shutdowns of travel, and we've been impacted by COVID-19 itself. I have to test every day I'm on tour, okay, to enter the venue, to cross borders. If I test positive, that's immediate force majeure shutdown of all ensuing gigs, and it means I'm responsible for paying my own hotel until I can't get in a plane and come home. So we need to, if we want to encourage the real economy of New York musicians, we need to do that pilot project to offer insurance and to do the research so that Mohm's report was wonderful. It omits music as an export. We can't benefit, we can't return without understanding the real economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. That concludes this panel, and thank you to everyone for your testimony. I'm just checking for council member hands or chair if anybody has questions for this panel. Okay, so I'm not seeing hands. So with that, we will move to the next panel. So I will name the panelists, the witnesses, and then call you one by one. The next panelist will be Sami, and apologies in advance for any pronunciation issues. Sami Abu Shamais from Flushing Town Hall, Rocky Bucano from Universal Hip Hop Museum, and David Freudenthal from Carnegie Hall. So Sami Abu Shamais, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Osei and members of the committee for the opportunity. I'm Sami Abu Shamais, Deputy Director of Flushing Town Hall, a member of the Cultural Institutions Group, and a member of the Latinx Arts Consortium of New York, LXNY. The preliminary budget for the DCLA for fiscal 23 represents a significant funding cut for Flushing Town Hall, more than 50% of our city funding. As one of the smallest CIGs, our baseline funding is $375,292, a figure that hasn't increased for more than a decade. Instead, for the last several years, we've depended on the one-time increases added at adoption and a bunch of initiatives, including CTC and supplemental support, to be whole, bringing our annual operating support funding to around $800,000, a figure that is comparable to what we were getting in 2008 before the financial crash. So it's taken us 14 years to get back to where we were. At the same time, during a time when we had to lay off people initially and have gradually built back the organization. And we don't have the base of wealth to suffer these cuts. So I'm here with three requests. First, that the council restore the fiscal 22 $35 million, as a bunch of people have said. Second, that those increases be baselined. The uncertainty, so for us, more than 50% of our city funding is not baselined. It's crazy. And then third, consider significant increases beyond the $35 million. DCLA support is incredibly inequitable across the 5 boroughs, with one estimate being that Manhattan receives 10 times the per capita funding of Queens and 5 times the per capita funding of Brooklyn. So we don't want to see any organization cut to restore equity. The People's Cultural Plan in 2017 said that a figure of $270 million would create equity across the city. Shadi Lithcott, I want to shout out to what she said. $1 billion, 1% of the city budget is what we really need. Those are the numbers we should be talking about. That would really make us the cultural capital we should be. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for your testimony. The next panelist will be Rocky Bucano from the Universal Hip Hop Museum.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chairman Osei and esteemed City Council members of the Cultural Affairs Committee. I'm Rocky Bucano, President and Executive Director of the Universal Hip Hop Museum, the Bronx and New York City's newest and most diverse cultural institution. The Universal Hip Hop Museum serves as the cultural anchor of the Bronx Point development, which features 100% affordable housing in the Mott Haven section of the Bronx. The journey to establish a permanent home for hip hop began 12 years ago. Construction of the Universal Hip Hop Museum's 53,000 square foot state-of-the-art building began last year during the height of the global pandemic. Despite the challenges of building a new cultural institution during a global pandemic, the museum's construction remains on track to open in 2024. I am here to request $8 million in new capital funding to support design and construction related to the museum's interior fit out, and $175,000 in discretionary funding to support the museum's cultural and educational programs. The city's investment is vital to the museum's continued growth, development, and ongoing construction. When the Universal Hip Hop Museum opens in 2024, it will become New York City's newest global cultural attraction, drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors annually from around the world uptown to the Bronx. This increased tourism will generate millions of dollars in revenue and help local small business owners realize new revenue. The Universal Hip Hop Museum's construction has created new jobs already and will create many new employment opportunities in the years to come. There is no doubt that the Universal Hip Hop Museum's economic impact on the Bronx will be transformative. Since the Universal Hip Hop Museum's journey began, we have produced a variety of educational, cultural, and social justice programs serving students and educators from the city's 5 boroughs. This year, the Universal Hip Hop Museum is producing a hip hop physics program for New York City middle school and high school students. We are also introducing a new program called Shoot Cameras, Not Guns, designed to help reduce gun violence committed by both young men and young women who live in under-resourced communities. I thank you for allowing me to testify today.
Thank you so much for your testimony. The final member of this panel will be David Freudenthal from Carnegie Hall. Thank you, and you may begin your testimony.
Hi, everybody. Just want to say how honored I am to be in a space with all these extraordinary arts professionals in city government, in the sector, all fighting together to support this field. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to members of the committee. Carnegie Hall is another proud member of the CIG, and I just want to lend our voice to underscore Coco Killingsworth's testimony, and the calls from our colleagues in the arts and cultural sector for increased investment in 23. As you've heard, I won't take you through them again, but it's a massive and robust need, and we're grateful for your attention to it. For Carnegie Hall, our public service mission is central to why and how we exist. We've there's a lot happening on our stages. I just want to talk quickly about some of our partnerships with the city as demonstration that CIGs, big and small, are all deeply committed to serving New Yorkers and supporting our cultural colleagues. Our citywide festivals, our partnerships with cultural organizations around the city. We're super excited about our Afrofuturism Festival this year, which is happening right now, which is as well as our Carnegie Hall Citywide, which are free community concerts and partnerships all around the city with community-based organizations, and also our deep partnerships in the city's schools and community settings, including our work in justice settings, which the council has supported so deeply. I would call out that the council has a big role in supporting culture, both in the funding to the agency and through their own discretionary support through capital and expense lines. And you all are key partners to it, and we look forward to the work together. I just want to wrap up by calling out the chair for asking the question that everybody wanted to know, which was whether that green screen was real or not. So thank you for that. We all needed to know. Many thanks.
Thank you so much. This is the last member of the panel. Chair, do you have any questions?
No more questions for me.
Okay, thank you so much. So with that, we're actually moving to our final panel today. I'm just watching for council member questions and I don't see any hands, so we will move forward. The members of that panel will be Cheryl Warfield and Lisa Alpert. So Ms. Warfield, I will call you and you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Speaker Adams, Chair Osei, and committee members for hearing my testimony. I'm Cheryl Warfield, a union opera singer, independent producer of work about the Black experience, and founder of Advance More Opera, a community-based nonprofit that presents concerts and educational and cultural outreach to youth and families. I speak today to remind the council that arts and culture have and continue to provide a guiding light towards the city's recovery, and that small BIPOC organizations like mine strive to provide services in the trenches where most needed. I testify in solidarity with New Yorkers for Culture and Arts, New York's cultural institution groups, the Coalition for Theaters of Color, and community-based arts and culture organizations. I entreat the council to mobilize and support arts and culture with substantial investment in historically under-resourced neighborhoods. A fund earmarked to target underserved neighborhoods would bring the benefits of cultural assets where they are most needed. Investing in cultural centers in these neighborhoods can and will improve the vitality, safety, and strength of these communities and their families. Such investment will strengthen New York overall. To that end, we ask that the fiscal 22 PEG cuts to the Cultural Development Fund be restored. Regarding council priorities for fiscal 2023, we ask for a restoration of all council initiatives and a restoration of 35 million of fiscal 22 funding. An additional 50 million is needed for the cultural community. Cultural equity is central to every part of this ask as we envision an equitable and thriving culture and city that benefits all. Let's continue the conversation in the coming weeks regarding these asks and to elaborate on the benefits for all New Yorkers that equitable and adequate funding will provide. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And I apologize, I left one person off this panel. That's my mistake. So it will be, sorry, the last person on this panel will be Alton Amable, and apologies for any pronunciation. So with that, we will call the next person on this panel. Apologies, one moment. And Lisa, apologies. I'm just making sure that I'm not missing anyone else very quickly and just checking. And we will check for anyone we've missed at the end. Okay, so with that, we'll move to Lisa Alpert, and then Mr. Amable, you will be the last member of this panel. Thank you very much. Ms. Alpert, you may begin your testimony when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Apologies, we might have lost the witness. So we will just move to the next person on the panel. Mr. Amable, we'll move to you next. If you're ready to submit your testimony, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
All right, cool. I'm Alton Amable. I'm president and founder of Tropical Fifth. We're a cultural arts organization, do programming mainly in Brooklyn. One of the things I wanted to focus on is the importance of culture and how it could affect someone's well-being. So coming out of the pandemic, I was asking some of the students what did coming back means to them. And one of the common things I heard coming back into the program, we teach still pan, we teach stills, dance, both to youth and seniors, was the word depression. It just helped them tremendously just to get back. I know the coronavirus had us to shut down for a little while, but we still were able to move virtually. And just having that connection to another human being and express your culture, I just want to state how important that, those things are. Another factor I'd like to bring up is working with the libraries. We have done a lot of programming with the Brooklyn Public Library. We have a festival coming up for Caribbean Heritage Month in June. So funding the libraries, funding small cultural institutions like us to partner up with major cultural institutions is something that, I would like to, you guys to consider and to just keep making it happen with the funding that you guys have provided us. So thanks to all the council members who have supported us, and hopefully that funding could continue for us and other cultural institutions. Thanks. If any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And also Ms. Alpert has now logged in. So we will go back to Lisa Alpert and then conclude this panel. So Ms. Alpert, you may begin when the sergeant calls the clock.
Time starts now.
Hi, Chair Osei. Hello. It's nice to meet you. You must be exhausted. My name is Lisa Alpert. I'm representing Greenwood. I'm going to start with the obvious. Greenwood is a cemetery. I know you know. We're a National Historic Landmark, and we cover a really big piece of land in South Brooklyn. We've been here since 1838.
My grandfather is buried there.
Oh yeah, you're kidding. Oh, let's talk offline. Okay. We have archival records. I bet you would like to see. Okay, that's great. Oh, you threw me off. Okay, wait a minute, hold on.
Sorry.
That's right. I'm just kidding. So as a cultural space, Greenwood is the backdrop for concerts and art installations, walking tours, trolley tours. We have an artist in residence program, which is now in its second year. And this year's artist is the amazing genderqueer artist, Rowan Renee. School programs that include Black pioneers of Greenwood, women pioneers of Greenwood, immigrant pioneers of Greenwood, etc. Concerts in the catacombs, Latinx programming, LGBTQ plus programming, Juneteenth. I could go on and on. We host about 320 programs and tours every year. And we're not a public park and we're not a museum, but we basically act like both of them to serve the community. So, and we're a tranquil and healing and inspiring space for all. Here's what's going to really surprise you. Greenwood sees an astoundingly high number of visitors annually. In 2021, we had 450,000 visitors from across Brooklyn and New York City. And that's because we're open 7 days a week, until 7 p.m. daily, 365 days a year at no cost to the public. So Chair Ose, I think you're interested in developing new and sort of unconventional spaces for cultural programming. Well, I can say that Greenwood definitely checks that box for unconventional. So we would love to talk to you about our experience.
Time expired.
For this year's budget, Greenwood has two asks in front of the City Council: a discretionary ask to support our large-scale free public programming, including Juneteenth and Dia de los Muertos, Battle of Brooklyn Day, etc. And second, we're seeking capital for our Education and Welcome Center, which will allow us to serve more Brooklynites, more New Yorkers year-round with our educational and cultural programming. So we're excited to support your vision for cultural programming in New York City, and we just look forward to meeting with you and working with you to support our shared New York community.
Thank you so much for your testimony. So, Chair, this concludes the end of this panel, and this includes all of our public witnesses. So we will do one final check if there's anybody we missed, but this will otherwise conclude the public portion of our hearing. If there is anyone we missed, if you can please use the raise hand function in Zoom. I'm just checking and just making sure that there's nobody else. And if there are any council members that had questions for this panel, apologies. I'm not seeing anyone. So, Chair, there are no members of the public who would like to testify. So this concludes public testimony.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you to everyone that testified, both from the libraries and all from every cultural institution and SIG that also did attend. And without further ado, I will close us out. Thank you, everyone.